Caleb Rourke pressed his hand against the wet heat spreading across his ribs and knew he was dying. The Arizona dust tasted like copper. His stallion was gone. The rustlers were circling back, and town was 8 miles through country that didn't forgive mistakes. He'd survived Apache raids, droughts that cracked the earth open, and winters that froze cattle standing up, but a bullet in the right place didn't care about any of that. Then he saw her, a woman in a dusty traveling coat, walking toward him like she had all the time in the world, carrying a leather medical bag that looked older than both of them combined. If you want to see how a dying rancher and a mysterious stranger survived the most dangerous frontier in America, stay with me until the end. And drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The sun wasn't supposed to set this early. Caleb Rourke squinted at the horizon, trying to calculate how much daylight he had left. But the numbers kept sliding away from him like water through a sieve. His ribs screamed every time he breathed. The gunshot graze along his side had stopped bleeding an hour ago, but that didn't mean much. He'd seen men walk for miles with worse wounds and then drop dead the moment they sat down. He was about 3 miles from his ranch. Might as well have been 30. The ambush had come out of nowhere, which was the only way ambushes ever came. He'd been riding fence line along the southern border of his property when the first shot cracked past his ear and took his hat clean off. By the time he'd gotten his rifle up, there were 4 of them spreading out through the scrub oak, and his horse, a big roan gelding named Rust, had already decided this wasn't a fight worth staying for. Caleb had managed to drop one of them before a bullet punched through his side and a rifle stock caught him across the ribs hard enough to knock him off his feet. He'd crawled into a dry wash and stayed there until the sounds of them ransacking his saddlebags faded into the distance. Then he'd started walking. That was 2 hours ago. Now he was sprawled against a boulder that still held the day's heat, trying to decide if getting back on his feet was worth the effort. His ranch was close enough that he could picture every detail. The low-slung adobe house with the crooked porch rail he kept meaning to fix. The barn that needed new shingles before winter. The corral where his 3 remaining horses were probably wondering why he was late with their feed. He could see it all so clearly that for a moment he thought he was already there. Then the pain in his ribs dragged him back. "Get up," he said out loud. His voice sounded wrong, thin and papery, like it belonged to someone else. "Get up, you stubborn bastard!" He got one boot under him, then the other. The world tilted sideways and he had to grab the boulder to keep from going down. Blood roared in his ears. When it cleared, he was still standing, which he decided to count as a victory. That's when he saw her. At first he thought she was a mirage because nothing about her made sense. She was walking toward him along the old cattle trail that ran parallel to the wash, moving at a steady pace that suggested she knew exactly where she was going. She wore a long brown traveling coat that was dusty at the hem and a hat that had seen better days, and she carried a worn leather bag in her left hand. Caleb blinked. She didn't disappear. "Hey!" he called out. His voice cracked halfway through. "Hey!" She stopped. For a long moment she just stood there, studying him from about 20 yards away. Then she adjusted her grip on the bag and walked toward him. As she got closer, Caleb registered details that his fuzzy brain tried to sort into some kind of order. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a face that was handsome rather than pretty. Her eyes were gray and sharp, taking in his blood-stained shirt and the way he was leaning against the boulder like it was the only thing holding him upright. "You're hurt," she said. It wasn't a question. "Rustlers," Caleb managed. 4 of them, maybe an hour ago. Her expression didn't change. "Are they still in the area?" "Don't know. Don't think so." She set down the bag and moved closer, her eyes tracking over him with the kind of detached focus he'd seen in the town doctor. "Where are you hit?" "Side. Graze, mostly. Ribs are worse. Caught a rifle stock." "Show me." Caleb tried to straighten up and immediately regretted it. The woman, whoever she was, stepped in and steadied him with a hand on his shoulder. Her grip was stronger than he expected. "Easy," she said. "Don't move more than you have to." She unbuttoned his shirt with quick, efficient movements and peeled back the fabric. Caleb looked down and saw a mess of dried blood and fresh seepage that looked worse than it felt. The woman, he really needed to ask her name, bent closer, her fingers probing along his ribs with a gentleness that somehow hurt more than rough handling would have. "Broken?" he asked. "Cracked, at least. Could be worse." She straightened up and met his eyes. "You lose consciousness at all?" "No." "Dizzy? Nauseous?" "Some." How far to the nearest doctor? Town's 8 miles northeast. My ranch is closer, about 3 miles that way. He gestured vaguely with his chin. She looked in the direction he'd indicated, then back at him. Something shifted in her expression, a calculation being made, a decision reached. Can you walk? She asked. I walked this far. That's not what I asked. Caleb felt a flicker of irritation cut through the fog in his head. Who are you? Lillian Hart. She said it like it was the least important piece of information in the world. Can you walk 3 miles or not? Probably not. Then we need to get you on a horse. Don't have one. Ran off during the shooting. Lillian was quiet for a moment, looking back the way she'd come. Then she said, I passed a ranch about 2 miles back. If I go now, I can probably convince them to loan me a horse and be back before dark. That's the Morrison place, Caleb said. They're not real generous with strangers. Then it's a good thing I'm persuasive. She picked up her bag. I'm going to leave this with you. Inside there's a flask of water and some bandages. Drink the water slowly and try to keep pressure on that wound. If you start feeling confused or you can't stay awake, that's bad. Understand? I'm not an idiot. I didn't say you were. She set the bag down next to him. I'm saying you've lost blood, and you're hurt worse than you're letting on, and if I come back and find you dead, I'm going to be irritated because it means I walked 4 extra miles for nothing. Despite everything, Caleb felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Yes, ma'am. She gave him one last measuring look, then turned and started walking. Caleb watched her go until she disappeared around a bend in the trail. Then he opened the bag. Inside was exactly what she'd said. A dented tin flask, a roll of clean bandages, and a collection of small glass bottles with handwritten labels he couldn't quite read in the fading light. There was also a folded piece of paper that looked like a letter and a small leather-bound book. He took a long drink from the flask. The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, but it was the best thing he'd ever put in his mouth. He forced himself to stop after a few swallows and screwed the cap back on. Then he leaned back against the boulder and waited. The sun was almost down when he heard hoofbeats. Caleb had been drifting in and out for the last half hour, fighting to keep his eyes open. Now he jerked fully awake and reached for the revolver he wasn't carrying. He'd lost it somewhere during the fight. His ribs punished him for the sudden movement. But it was Lillian riding a rangy bay mare and leading a second horse, a sturdy-looking buckskin gelding that eyed Caleb with deep suspicion. She dismounted in one smooth motion and came over to him. Still conscious. Good. Told you I wasn't an idiot. Jury's still out. She crouched down and pressed her fingers against the side of his neck, counting under her breath. Your pulse is thready but steady. How's the pain? Manageable. Liar. She stood up and looked at the buckskin. Think you can get on that horse if I help you? Probably. That's not encouraging. It's the best you're going to get. Lillian sighed. All right, let's do this before we lose the light completely. Getting Caleb onto the horse was an ugly process that involved a lot of gritted teeth and at least one extremely creative string of profanity. By the time he was in the saddle, he was shaking and Lillian's face was tight with concentration. How do you feel? She asked. Like I got kicked by a mule. Can you stay on? Yeah. She didn't look convinced, but she mounted her own horse and took the buckskin's reins. Your ranch is northeast from here? Yeah, follow the trail for about a mile, then cut east at the big cottonwood. You'll see the house. If you start to fall, yell. I'll try to remember that. They rode in silence. Caleb focused on staying upright and breathing as shallowly as possible. Every jolt of the horse's gait sent fresh lances of pain through his ribs, but he'd had worse. Probably. The details were getting fuzzy. You didn't ask, he said after a while. Lillian glanced back at him. Ask what? What I was doing out here alone. If the story about the rustlers was true. I saw the bullet hole in the blood. That part's not a story. Could have shot myself. Could have, she agreed. But you didn't. How do you know? Because if you were the kind of man who'd shoot himself for attention, you'd have aimed somewhere less inconvenient. She paused. Also, you're too mean to die from something stupid. Caleb surprised himself by laughing. It hurt, but it was worth it. They reached the cottonwood as the last of the daylight drained from the sky. Lillian turned them east without needing directions, and 10 minutes later the dark shape of Caleb's ranch house appeared against the stars. That it? She asked. That's it. Looks like you've got company. Caleb's hand went instinctively to where his gun should have been. What? There's smoke from the chimney. You leave a fire burning when you left. No. Lillian brought both horses to a stop. Could be your rustlers came back to finish the job. Could be. Caleb studied the house, trying to think through the fog in his head. But they'd have scattered my stock and burned the place. Smoke means someone's trying not to be noticed. So what do we do? We? Caleb looked at her. Lady, you got me this far. You don't owe me anything else. I didn't ride 3 miles in the dark because I enjoy the scenery. Lillian's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. If there's trouble waiting, I'd rather know about it now than walk into it blind. Caleb considered that. There's a back way in through the barn. If someone's in the house, they won't see us coming. Lead the way. They circled wide around the property, approaching from the east where a stand of scrub pine provided cover. Caleb's barn was a low structure built from rough-cut lumber that had weathered to the color of old bone. The door was hanging slightly open. Lillian dismounted and helped Caleb down. This time he didn't protest. His legs weren't entirely sure they wanted to hold him. Stay here, Lillian whispered. Like hell. She shot him a look that could have stripped paint, but she didn't argue. They moved toward the barn together, Lillian slightly ahead. Inside, the darkness was total. Caleb heard the soft shuffle of hooves, and the familiar smell of hay and horse sweat washed over him. He reached out and found the rough wood of a stall partition, using it to guide himself forward. Someone's been here, Lillian whispered. Fresh tracks. Caleb's eyes were starting to adjust. He could make out the shapes of his 3 horses in their stalls, all of them alert and watching the door that led to the main house. Then he heard voices. They were muffled by the distance and the thick adobe walls, but they were definitely coming from inside the house. At least 2 people, maybe more. I'm going in, Caleb said quietly. You can barely stand. It's my house, and you'll be very dead if you walk in there. Lillian grabbed his arm. Let me look first. Why would you? Because I'm not bleeding and I can move quietly, and because if you get yourself killed after I spent half the day keeping you alive, I'm going to be extremely annoyed. She let go of his arm. Stay here. I mean it. Before Caleb could argue, she slipped through the door and disappeared. He counted to 60, then to 60 again. The pain in his ribs had settled into a constant throb that made it hard to think about anything else. He was trying to decide whether to follow her when the door opened again and Lillian reappeared. It's a woman, she said. Middle-aged, looks scared. She's alone. You talked to her? No, I watched through the window. Lillian paused. She's cooking something, making herself at home. Caleb pushed past her and headed for the house. Lillian caught up to him before he reached the door. At least let me go first, she hissed. No! He grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. The woman at his stove spun around with a yelp, brandishing a wooden spoon like a weapon. She was exactly as Lillian had described, middle-aged, worn-looking, dressed in a faded calico dress that had been mended more times than Caleb could count. Her face was lined with exhaustion and something that looked like barely controlled panic. Who are you? Caleb demanded. The woman's eyes went wide. Mr. Rourke? Oh, thank the Lord, I thought you were dead. Caleb felt the room tilt slightly. How do you know my name? I'm Margaret Chen. I worked at the Morrison Ranch. She set down the spoon with shaking hands. I came here because I didn't know where else to go. Why would you come here? Because the Morrisons are gone, Margaret said. Her voice cracked. The rustlers came this afternoon. They took everything, the horses, the cattle, even the chickens. Mr. Morrison tried to fight them, and they... She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Lillian moved past Caleb and gently guided Margaret into a chair. Take your time. They killed him, Margaret whispered. Shot him right there in the yard while his wife screamed. Then they burned the barn and rode off laughing. She looked up at Caleb with red-rimmed eyes. Mrs. Morrison is with the neighbors. I ran. I'm sorry, I ran. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, trying to process this. How many were there? 8, maybe 10. I couldn't count them all. Which direction did they go? North toward the canyon country. Lillian caught Caleb's eye. She didn't say anything, but he could read the message clearly enough. You're in no condition to go after them. He knew she was right. That didn't make it easier to swallow. I made stew, Margaret said suddenly. I hope you don't mind. I found some jerky and potatoes in your stores, and I thought... She trailed off, looking embarrassed. I needed something to do with my hands. That's fine, Caleb said. The The smell of cooking food was making his stomach twist. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." Lillian stood up. "Mr. Rourke needs medical attention. Is there a bedroom I can use?" "Through there." Caleb gestured toward the back of the house. "But I'm fine." "You're not fine." Lillian picked up her bag. "And arguing with me is just wasting time we don't have. Mrs. Chen, can you bring some hot water and clean rags?" "Of course." Margaret was already moving toward the stove. Lillian took Caleb's arm and steered him toward the bedroom. He was too tired to fight her. The room was small and spare. An iron frame bed, a battered dresser, a single chair. Caleb sat down on the edge of the bed and let Lillian peel off his ruined shirt. "This is going to hurt," she said. "It already hurts." "It's going to hurt more." She was right. The next 20 minutes were a special kind of hell that involved hot water, carbolic acid, and Lillian's fingers pressing against damaged ribs with the kind of clinical detachment that somehow made it worse. Caleb gritted his teeth and stared at the ceiling and tried not to embarrass himself. "2 cracked ribs," Lillian said finally. "Maybe 3. The bullet wound is shallow, but it's going to need watching for infection." She began wrapping his torso with long strips of clean cloth, pulling them tight enough to restrict his breathing. "You need to rest. No riding, no heavy lifting, nothing that's going to stress these ribs. Minimum 2 weeks, probably 4. Can't do that. You don't have a choice. There's a gang of rustlers out there killing people and stealing stock. I can't just sit here." Lillian tied off the bandage and met his eyes. "What you can't do is ride out there and get yourself killed because you're too stubborn to admit you're hurt. That ranch needs defending." "From who? The rustlers are long gone and you can barely stand." She stood up and began packing her supplies back into the bag. "Besides, Mrs. Chen said they went north. That's away from here. They might come back." "They might," Lillian agreed. "But if they do, you being half dead won't help anyone." Caleb knew she was right. That didn't make it any easier to accept. Margaret appeared in the doorway with a bowl of stew and a piece of cornbread. "I thought you might be hungry." The smell hit Caleb like a fist. His stomach twisted with sudden, desperate hunger. "Thank you." He ate slowly, letting the hot food settle the shaking in his hands. Lillian watched him with that same measuring look she'd been giving him all day. "Where are you headed?" he asked her between bites. "I was going to Tombstone," she said, "but it looks like I'll be staying here for a while." "Why?" "Because you need someone to change those bandages and make sure you don't do anything stupid." She crossed her arms. "Unless you have someone else who can do it?" Caleb thought about that. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and after what happened to the Morrisons, he doubted anyone would be eager to come check on him. The town doctor made house calls, but only if you could pay in advance. "I can't pay you," he said finally. "I didn't ask you to." "So why help?" Lillian was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer, but with an edge that suggested the words cost her something to say. "Because 3 months ago I walked away from a life that was killing me slowly," she said. "I've been moving ever since, trying to figure out what comes next. And today, I found a man bleeding to death in the middle of nowhere, and I had the skills to help him. So I did." She looked at him. "Maybe that's reason enough." Caleb studied her face, trying to read what wasn't being said. There was a story there, a deep one, with sharp edges and dark corners. But he was too tired to push. "All right," he said. "You can stay, but I'm not an invalid." "I never said you were. And when this is over, you're free to leave. No obligations." "Understood." Margaret reappeared with more stew. "Miss Hart, you should eat something too." "Thank you." Lillian took the bowl and sat down in the chair. They ate in silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and sending dust skittering across the floorboards. Caleb finished his stew and set the bowl aside, feeling the food settle warm and heavy in his stomach. "Get some sleep," Lillian said. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too." "I'll manage." She stood up and moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to look out at the darkness. "Mrs. Chen is settling in the spare room. I'll take the chair." Caleb wanted to argue, but his body had other ideas. The moment his head hit the pillow, exhaustion rolled over him like a black wave. His last conscious thought was of Lillian Hart standing at the window, silhouetted against the starlight, watching the night for threats that might never come, or might be closer than any of them knew. Caleb woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of women's voices in the next room. For a confused moment, he couldn't place where he was. Then his ribs reminded him with a sharp jab that made him catch his breath. He lay still, staring at the rough-hewn beams of his ceiling, while yesterday's events sorted themselves into order. The ambush, Lillian Hart appearing out of nowhere. The Morrisons. He pushed himself upright, biting back a grunt when his ribs protested. Someone had pulled off his boots while he slept and draped a blanket over him. Through the gap in the curtains, he could see pale morning light, which meant he'd been out for hours. The voices in the next room got louder. He caught Margaret Chen's anxious tone, then Lillian's calmer response. Caleb stood up carefully, testing his balance. His head felt clearer than it had last night, but his body was a catalog of complaints. He found a clean shirt in the dresser, wrinkled but decent, and managed to get it on without passing out. When he walked into the main room, both women turned to look at him. "You should still be in bed," Lillian said. She was sitting at his table with a cup of coffee, her hair pulled back and her traveling coat draped over the back of the chair. In the morning light, she looked tired but alert, like she'd spent the night watching for trouble. "Probably," Caleb agreed, "but lying around makes me twitchy." Margaret was at the stove stirring something in a pot. She looked even more worn out than yesterday, her eyes ringed with dark circles. "I made porridge and coffee." "Appreciate it." Caleb lowered himself into a chair, moving like an old man. His ribs were wrapped tight enough that breathing took effort. Lillian poured him coffee without asking. "How do you feel?" "Like I got stomped by a bull." "That's progress from yesterday." She pushed the cup toward him. "Any dizziness? Trouble focusing?" "No." "Lie to me again, and I'll rewrap those ribs even tighter." Caleb took a sip of coffee to avoid answering. It was strong enough to strip paint and tasted like heaven. Margaret brought over 2 bowls of porridge and set them on the table. "I need to go check on Mrs. Morrison today, see if there's anything I can do." "You're not going alone," Lillian said. "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking, I'm telling you." Lillian's tone left no room for argument. "Those men could still be in the area." "She's right," Caleb said. "If they hit the Morrison place yesterday, they might circle back looking for stragglers." Margaret's hands twisted together. "Mrs. Morrison shouldn't be alone. Not after what happened." "Where is she now?" Lillian asked. "With the Hendersons, about 6 miles west. They're good people." Margaret sat down, though she didn't touch her food. "I keep thinking about Mr. Morrison. He was trying to protect his stock, that's all. And they just shot him." The room went quiet. Caleb stared into his coffee, remembering the sound of the bullet that had nearly killed him. These weren't ordinary rustlers. Ordinary rustlers took what they could carry and moved on. These men were something else. "How many ranches have they hit?" he asked. "At least 4 that I know of," Margaret said. "The Morrisons were the worst, but the Tanners lost half their herd 2 weeks ago, and someone burned out the line shack on the eastern range." "Sheriff know about this?" "Sheriff's in Tucson dealing with some kind of territorial dispute. Won't be back for another week, maybe 2. Margaret finally picked up her spoon, though she just pushed the porridge around in her bowl. "We're on our own out here." Caleb exchanged a look with Lillian. She raised one eyebrow, a silent question. "I can ride escort," he said. "No, you can't," Lillian replied flatly. "It's 6 miles. You can barely walk across the room without turning gray." She set down her cup. "I'll take Mrs. Chen to the Hendersons. You're staying here." "Like hell I am." "Mr. Rourke." Lillian's voice went cold. "You have 2 cracked ribs and a bullet wound that could go septic if you're not careful. If you get on a horse today, those ribs could shift and puncture a lung. Then you'll drown in your own blood while Mrs. Chen and I watch, and I promise you it won't be quick or dignified." The image was vivid enough to shut him up. Margaret looked between them with wide eyes. "Maybe I should just wait a few days." "No." Lillian stood up. "Mrs. Morrison needs you, and waiting won't make it safer. We'll go this morning, check on her, and be back before dark." She looked at Caleb. "You'll stay here and rest. That's not a suggestion." Caleb wanted to argue, but the sharp pain in his side when he shifted in the chair made a pretty compelling counterpoint. "Fine," he said, "but you take the shotgun, and you don't stop for anything on the way back." Agreed. Margaret went to gather her few possessions while Lillian packed supplies. Caleb watched from the table, feeling useless and hating it. "There's jerky in the larder," he said, "and extra ammunition in the barn, second stall on the left." "I'll find it." Lillian was checking her medical bag, inventorying supplies with quick efficiency. "If anyone shows up while we're gone, don't answer the door." "I'm not hiding in my own house." You're also not in any condition to defend it. She closed the bag and met his eyes. I mean it, Caleb. If trouble comes, you hide. Pride isn't worth dying over. The use of his first name caught him off guard. She'd been calling him Mr. Rourke since yesterday, maintaining that formal distance. Now, suddenly, they were on different terms. Same goes for you, he said. I don't plan on being heroic. Good. Heroes mostly end up dead. Lillian almost smiled at that. We'll be back before dark. She went to help Margaret, leaving Caleb alone with his coffee and his frustration. They left 20 minutes later riding two of Caleb's horses, a steady mare for Margaret and the buckskin gelding for Lillian. Caleb watched from the porch as they headed west, Lillian sitting straight in the saddle with the shotgun across her lap. Then the house was quiet, except for the wind. Caleb spent the first hour trying to find things to do that didn't involve moving much. He checked the larder, counted ammunition, and made a mental inventory of what needed fixing once he could actually fix things. The list was depressingly long. By the second hour, he was bored enough to consider ignoring Lillian's orders and doing something stupid. His ribs talked him out of it. He was dozing in the chair when he heard horses. Caleb came fully awake, adrenaline cutting through the fog. Multiple riders, moving fast. He grabbed the rifle from where it leaned against the wall and moved to the window, staying to the side where he couldn't be seen. 4 men rode into his yard like they owned it. They weren't dressed like ranchers. Too many guns, too much swagger. The one in front, a tall man with a scarred face and a black duster, was looking at the house like he was deciding whether it was worth burning down. Caleb recognized the type. He'd seen plenty of them during the war and in the years after. Men who'd gotten a taste for violence and never found a reason to stop. The scarred man dismounted and walked toward the porch. The other 3 spread out, hands resting on their revolvers. Caleb moved back from the window and positioned himself behind the heavy oak table. His ribs were screaming at him, but his head was clear. "Anyone home?" the scarred man called out. His voice had the flat effect of someone who didn't care about the answer. "We're looking for a woman. Dark hair, traveling alone. Someone saw her heading this way yesterday." Caleb's blood went cold. They were looking for Lillian. "We just want to talk to her," the man continued. He was on the porch now, his boots heavy on the old wood. "No trouble, just a conversation." Caleb stayed silent. Through the gap in the curtains, he could see one of the other men circling toward the barn. "Come on now," the scarred man said. "We know someone's in there, saw the smoke from the chimney." A pause. "If you're smart, you'll open this door. If you're not, we'll open it for you." Caleb levered around into the rifle. The sound was loud in the quiet house. Everything stopped. "That's not friendly," the scarred man said. His voice hadn't changed, but there was something underneath it now, a kind of anticipation. "We just want to talk." "Talk from where you're standing," Caleb said. "You the owner of this place?" "I am." "You see a woman come through here? 30s, dark hair, carrying a medical bag?" "No." "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." "See, that's funny." The scarred man shifted his weight. "Because we tracked her to that old ranch down the road, and the woman there said she came this way. So either you're lying, or she got lost between there and here." Caleb kept his breathing steady. "Don't know what to tell you. Here's what I think." The scarred man's voice went harder. "I think she's here. Maybe in the house. Maybe hiding in the barn. And I think you're protecting her, which is awful decent of you. But the thing is, we need to find her. So you've got 2 choices. You can open this door and hand her over, or we can come in and take her. Or you can get off my property before this gets ugly." The scarred man laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "Friend, it's already ugly. You're just too stubborn to see it." Caleb heard boots on the porch. More than one set. They were getting into position. "Last chance," the scarred man said. "Open the door." Caleb shifted his weight, trying to get a better angle on the window. His ribs punished him for it. Through the glass, he could see the men in the yard drawing their guns. This was about to go sideways fast. Then he heard something that changed everything. More hoofbeats, coming hard from the west. The scarred man heard it too. He stepped back from the door, looking toward the sound. A rider appeared over the rise, a single man on a big gray horse moving at a full gallop. He wore a star on his vest that caught the sunlight. The scarred man swore and signaled to his men. They mounted up fast, spurring their horses toward the north. By the time the lawman reached the yard, they were gone. Caleb stayed at the window, rifle ready, watching the stranger dismount. The man was in his 50s with iron gray hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent most of his life outdoors. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd been in enough gunfights to know better than to make sudden movements. "You all right in there?" he called out. "Who's asking?" "Deputy Marshal Tom Granger. I'm tracking a gang of rustlers that hit the Morrison place yesterday." He kept his hands visible, away from his gun. "Got word they might be in this area." Caleb lowered the rifle and opened the door. "They were just here." Granger's expression went hard. "How many?" "4. They were asking about a woman." "What woman?" Caleb hesitated, trying to decide how much to tell. "A traveler. She helped me after I got shot yesterday." "Where is she now?" "Went to check on Mrs. Morrison with one of the Morrison hands." Granger swore under his breath. "When did they leave?" 2 hours ago, maybe 3. "Which direction?" "West toward the Henderson Ranch." The marshal turned and looked west, his jaw tight. "Those men, they say what they wanted with this woman?" "Just that they needed to talk to her." "That's horse shit." Granger walked back to his horse and checked his rifle. "They're part of a bigger operation. Been hitting ranches all through this territory for the last month. We thought they were just after stock, but there's been reports of them taking women too." Caleb felt his blood turn to ice. "What do you mean, taking women?" "Kidnapping them, selling them across the border, or to mining camps where nobody asks questions." Granger swung back into the saddle. "If your friend's out there and they find her—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "I'm coming with you," Caleb said. "You can barely stand." "I can ride. You'll slow me down." "She saved my life." Caleb went back inside and grabbed extra ammunition, ignoring the screaming protest from his ribs. "I'm not letting her get taken because I was too beat up to help." Granger studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Saddle up. Fast." 5 minutes later, they were riding west, pushing the horses harder than was smart. Caleb gritted his teeth against the pain, focusing on keeping his seat. Every jolt of the horse's gait sent fresh fire through his ribs, but he'd had worse. He kept telling himself that. "How much do you know about this woman?" Granger asked as they rode. "Not much. She said her name was Lillian Hart. She's got medical training." "She say where she came from?" "East, I think. She was heading to Tombstone when we crossed paths." "She mention any family? Anyone who might be looking for her?" Caleb thought about that. "No. Why?" "Because women don't usually travel alone through this country unless they're running from something." Granger's tone was matter of fact. "And if she's running, that might explain why those men are so determined to find her." The possibility hadn't occurred to Caleb. He'd been so focused on the immediate danger that he hadn't stopped to wonder what Lillian might be running from. "You think she's in trouble?" he asked. "I think everyone out here is in trouble," Granger said. "The question is what kind." They rode in silence after that. The land around them was harsh and unforgiving, all scrub brush and red rock, the kind of country that killed the careless and the unlucky without bothering to distinguish between them. After about an hour, Granger held up a hand. They stopped. "Tracks," he said, pointing to the ground. 2 horses, heading west. Fresh. "That'll be them." Granger dismounted and studied the tracks more carefully. Then he looked north and his expression changed. "We've got more tracks here. 4 riders, moving parallel." "They're following them," Caleb said. "Yeah," Granger remounted. "And they're gaining ground." They pushed the horses faster. Caleb's vision started to blur at the edges, but he ignored it, focusing on the horizon where the Henderson Ranch should be. That's when they heard the gunshot. It was distant but clear, a single crack that echoed off the rocks. Granger spurred his horse into a full gallop. Caleb followed, his ribs screaming in protest. They came over a rise and saw it. 2 women on horses, surrounded by 4 mounted men. One of the women, Lillian, had the shotgun up and aimed, but she was outnumbered and outgunned. The scarred man was talking to her, his hands spread in a gesture of false reason. Granger drew his rifle as they approached. "Federal Marshal, stand down!" The scarred man turned, saw them coming, and made his decision fast. He spurred his horse toward Lillian, reaching for her. She pulled the trigger. The shotgun blast caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him out of the saddle. The other 3 scattered, drawing their guns. Caleb yanked his rifle up and fired at the nearest rider. The shot went wide, but it was close enough to make the man think twice. He wheeled his horse around and took off north. Granger was already engaging the other 2, his rifle cracking in steady rhythm. One of the riders went down. The other decided discretion was the better part of valor and followed his partner north. The whole thing was over in less than a minute. Caleb rode up to Lillian, his heart pounding. You hit? No. Her face was pale, but her hands were steady on the shotgun. They came out of nowhere. We were almost to the Hendersons when they appeared on the ridge. Margaret was shaking so hard she could barely hold the reins. They said they were taking us to town. For protection. They were lying, Granger said. He dismounted and was checking the man Lillian had shot. The scarred man was still alive, clutching his shoulder and cursing. This one's part of the Garrett gang. They've been operating out of the canyon country for the last 6 months. The Garrett gang, Lillian repeated. She lowered the shotgun slowly. Why were they after us? Granger looked at her with the expression of a man who'd seen too much bad in the world to be surprised anymore. Because you're women traveling alone, and that makes you valuable. They've been taking women across the border, selling them to whoever's buying. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs and secured the wounded man. You're lucky we got here when we did. Lillian was very still. They were going to kidnap us. Yeah, and sell us. Yeah. She sat there for a moment, processing that. Then she swung down from her horse, walked about 10 feet away, and vomited into the scrub. Caleb dismounted, carefully, and went to her. You all right? No. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. But I will be. Margaret was crying now, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Lillian pulled herself together and went to comfort the older woman, speaking in low, soothing tones. Granger came over to Caleb. You look like death. Feel like it too. You need a doctor. I've got one, Caleb nodded toward Lillian. She's the reason I'm still standing. Granger watched Lillian help Margaret down from her horse, his expression thoughtful. She's got spine, I'll give her that. Most women would be hysterical after something like this. She's not most women. I'm getting that impression. Granger turned his attention back to the wounded man. I need to get this one to jail and wire for backup. Those other riders are still out there, and they're going to be angry. You think they'll come back? I think they lost 2 men in a payday, so yeah, they'll come back. Granger squinted at the horizon. You got somewhere secure you can take these women? My ranch. That where you were when they showed up the first time? Yeah, then that's the first place they'll look. Granger thought for a moment. The Henderson place is closer, it's got good walls and plenty of people. You should take them there and stay until I can get some reinforcements out here. Caleb didn't like the idea of hiding, but he also wasn't stupid enough to think he could defend his ranch in his current condition. All right, he said, but I want to know when you're moving on these men. You want to come along? Yeah. Granger looked at him, really looked, taking in the careful way he was standing and the gray tinge to his skin. You get yourself killed and that lady doctor's going to shoot me. I'll take that risk. Your funeral. Granger walked back to his horse and mounted up. Get these women somewhere safe. I'll send word when we're ready to move. He rode off with the wounded man tied to his saddle, heading east toward town. Lillian came over to Caleb. Up close, he could see she was shaking slightly, the adrenaline wearing off. We should get moving, she said. Henderson Place is about 2 miles west. I know. She looked back at Margaret, who had stopped crying but still looked fragile. She needs somewhere safe to rest. So do you. I'm fine. You just shot a man. Lillian met his eyes. He was going to take us. I did what I had to do. There was steel in her voice, but Caleb could see the cost of it in her face. Whatever life she'd lived before this, it hadn't prepared her for killing. Nobody's life really did. Come on, he said quietly. Let's get out of here before those other men decide to come back. They rode to the Henderson place in tense silence. It was a larger spread than Caleb's, 2 houses, a big barn, and multiple corrals with good stock. People came out when they saw them approaching, and within minutes they were surrounded by concerned faces and rapid questions. Mrs. Morrison was there, a small woman with gray hair and red-rimmed eyes. When she saw Margaret, she burst into tears and pulled her into a fierce hug. The 2 women clung to each other, and Caleb had to look away. The Hendersons themselves were a middle-aged couple named Jack and Sarah, both practical people who'd been in the territory long enough to know trouble when they saw it. Sarah took one look at Caleb and steered him toward a chair. You're hurt, she said. I'm fine. You're also a terrible liar. She turned to Lillian. You know anything about medicine? Some. Good, because he looks like he's about to fall over. Lillian came over and knelt next to Caleb's chair, her hands already reaching for the buttons of his shirt. Let me see. I'm fine. Stop saying that. She peeled back his shirt and her expression tightened. You're bleeding through the bandages. Just a little. A little is still bleeding. She looked up at Sarah. Do you have somewhere I can work? Back bedroom. I'll get you what you need. They helped Caleb into the bedroom. He was too tired to protest anymore. Lillian unwrapped the bandages with gentle hands, revealing a mess underneath that made Sarah suck in a breath. How long has it been like this? Lillian asked. Since we left my place. You rode 8 miles with cracked ribs and a reopened wound. Had to. No, you wanted to. That's different. She cleaned the wound with sharp, efficient movements that hurt worse than the original injury. You're lucky you didn't cause permanent damage. Am I being lectured? Yes. Shut up and let me work. Sarah brought fresh bandages and hot water. Lillian worked in silence, her face tight with concentration. When she was done, Caleb's entire torso was wrapped so tight he could barely breathe. 24 hours of bed rest, Lillian said. Minimum. I don't care if the whole Garrett gang shows up at the door. They might. Then someone else can deal with them. She stood up and wiped her hands on a cloth. You're no good to anyone dead. Sarah showed them to separate rooms. Caleb got a small bedroom at the back of the house. Lillian got the guest room near the front. Margaret and Mrs. Morrison were sharing another room, their voices a low murmur through the walls. Caleb lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house. Someone was cooking. A child laughed somewhere outside. Normal life, continuing despite everything. He must have dozed off because when he opened his eyes again, the light had changed. Late afternoon, maybe early evening. Someone knocked on the door. Come in, he said. Lillian entered, carrying a tray with food and water. She looked more composed than earlier, though there were still lines of strain around her eyes. How do you feel? She asked. Like I got kicked by a mule. Again. That's becoming your catchphrase. She set the tray on the bedside table. Eat something. Sarah made stew. Caleb pushed himself upright carefully. Where's Margaret? With Mrs. Morrison. They're both exhausted, but they'll be all right. Lillian sat down in the chair by the window. The Hendersons are good people. They've agreed to let us all stay until the marshal gets this situation under control. That could be days. I know. They were quiet for a moment. Outside, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. You want to talk about what happened? Caleb asked. Not particularly. Sometimes it helps. Lillian looked at him. And sometimes it doesn't. Fair enough. Caleb ate the stew. It was good, thick with vegetables and meat, and tried not to think about how much everything hurt. I shot a man today, Lillian said suddenly. I keep thinking about it. The sound it made, the way he fell. You did what you had to do. I know that doesn't make it easier. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. Where I came from, violence was something that happened in newspapers or in stories. Not something you did with your own hands. Where did you come from? She was quiet for so long he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, Boston. My father was a surgeon. He taught me everything he knew, thinking I'd marry another doctor and help run his practice. A bitter laugh. Instead, I refused the marriage he'd arranged, packed my bags, and got on a train heading west. Been running ever since. Who were you supposed to marry? A colleague of my father's. Older man. Very respectable, very controlling. Her voice went flat. He had specific ideas about what a wife should be. Quiet, obedient, decorative. I lasted 3 weeks before I realized I'd rather die than spend my life like that. So you left. So I left. She turned to face him. And now there are men trying to kidnap me, and I've shot someone, and I'm hiding in a stranger's house in the middle of nowhere. She shook her head. My father would say I deserve this for being so reckless. Your father sounds like an ass. That surprised a laugh out of her. He is, but he's also right. I didn't think this through. I just ran. Sometimes running is the smartest thing you can do. Is that what you did? Run? Caleb considered his answer. No, I stayed, fought in the war, came back to nothing, built this ranch from dirt. But there were plenty of times I wanted to run. Still do, sometimes. Why don't you? Because I'm too stubborn to know when to quit. He set the empty bowl aside. And because running doesn't solve anything. The problems just follow you. Maybe. Lillian came back and sat down. Or maybe sometimes you need to run far enough that the problems can't find you. Those men found you pretty fast. They weren't looking for me specifically, I was just convenient. She said the word like it tasted bad. Wrong place, wrong time. Lucky the marshal showed up when he did. Lucky you came with him. She met his eyes. You didn't have to do that. You're hurt. You should have stayed at the ranch. You saved my life yesterday. Seemed only fair to return the favor. We're even then. I guess so. But looking at her face in the fading light, Caleb wasn't sure that was true. There was something building between them, a connection forged in blood and necessity. He didn't know what to call it yet. He wasn't sure he wanted to. Sarah knocked and entered with fresh bandages. Time to change those dressings again, and you, she pointed at Lillian, need to eat something. You haven't touched food all day. I'm not hungry. Don't care. You'll eat anyway. Sarah's tone brooked no argument. Can't have you getting weak on us. Not with trouble still out there. Lillian left, and Sarah went to work on Caleb's bandages. Her hands were rougher than Lillian's, but just as competent. That's a good woman, Sarah said as she worked. Smart, strong. Not many like her out here. I noticed. You planning on keeping her around? Caleb blinked. That's not my decision. Maybe it should be. Sarah tied off the last bandage. Women like that don't come along often. Be ashamed to let her slip away. She's got her own plans. Plans change. Sarah stood up and gathered the old bandages, especially when you've got a reason to stay. After she left, Caleb lay back and thought about that. About Lillian Hart with her medical bag and her secrets. About the way she'd stood up to armed men without flinching. About the fear in her eyes when she'd talked about the life she'd run from. Outside, night was falling fast. In the other rooms, he could hear the quiet sounds of people settling in for the evening, dishes being washed, low conversations, the creak of floorboards. Normal life, continuing. But Caleb knew better than to trust it. The Garrett gang was still out there, and men like that didn't give up easy. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. 3 days passed before Deputy Marshal Granger returned, and by then Caleb was ready to climb the walls. He'd spent the time recovering at the Henderson Ranch, following Lillian's orders because arguing with her was exhausting, and he was too tired to win. His ribs were healing, slowly, and the bullet wound had stopped seeping, but sitting idle while the Garrett gang was still out there felt like swallowing glass. On the morning of the 4th day, he found Lillian in the kitchen, helping Sarah prepare breakfast. She'd settled into the routine of the place with surprising ease, making herself useful in ways that went beyond her medical skills. Yesterday, she'd helped deliver a calf. The day before that, she'd stitched up Jack Henderson's hand after he'd caught it on a piece of barbed wire. You're up early, she said when she saw him. Couldn't sleep. Caleb poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove. Any word from Granger? Not yet. It's been 3 days. I can count. Lillian didn't look up from the biscuit dough she was kneading. He said he'd send word when he had reinforcements. That takes time. Those men could be anywhere by now. Then there's nothing we can do about it. She shaped the dough into rounds with practiced efficiency. You worrying yourself sick won't change that. Sarah glanced between them with barely concealed amusement. You two argue like an old married couple. We're not married, Lillian said quickly. I noticed. Sarah's smile widened. I also notice you spend most of your time making sure he doesn't do anything stupid. Someone has to. Caleb took his coffee to the table and sat down, ignoring the dull ache in his ribs. Through the window, he could see Jack and his 2 sons working in the corral, breaking in a young horse. Normal work. Normal life. He hated feeling useless. Margaret came in from the back room, looking better than she had in days. Mrs. Morrison was still a wreck, spending most of her time in bed, barely eating, but Margaret had thrown herself into work the way some people threw themselves into whiskey. Staying busy kept the demons at bay. Morning, she said. Any news? Not yet, Lillian replied. Mrs. Morrison had nightmares again last night, kept calling for her husband. Margaret's voice was tight. I gave her some of the sleeping draft you made, but I don't know how much longer we can keep doing this. She needs time, Lillian said gently. Grief doesn't follow a schedule. I know. I just wish there was more I could do. You're doing plenty. Sarah handed Margaret a cup of coffee. You being here is what's keeping her together. The sound of hoofbeats made everyone stop. Caleb was on his feet instantly, ignoring the protest from his ribs. Through the window, he saw 3 riders approaching, Granger and 2 men he didn't recognize. Stay inside, Caleb said to the women. Not a chance, Lillian replied. He didn't have time to argue. He walked out onto the porch, one hand resting on the revolver Jack had loaned him. His own guns were back at his ranch, assuming the Garrett gang hadn't ransacked the place. Granger dismounted and nodded a greeting. "Rourke, you look better." "I'll live." Caleb studied the two men with Granger. Both wore badges and had the hard-eyed look of lawmen who'd seen too much. "You get your reinforcements?" "Some. This is Deputy Carr and Deputy Wilson. They rode up from Tucson when they heard about the situation." Granger's expression was grim. "We've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where 3 more ranches got hit in the last 2 days. The gang's getting bolder." Granger pulled a folded paper from his coat. "We found this nailed to a tree near the Morrison place." Caleb unfolded it and read. The message was short and brutal. "We want what's ours. Hand over the women, or next time we burn everything." "They think we're holding something that belongs to them," Granger said. "Specifically, they think we're hiding women they consider their property." Lillian had come out onto the porch. She read the note over Caleb's shoulder, and her face went pale. "They mean me," she said quietly. "And Mrs. Chen," Granger confirmed. "Maybe even Mrs. Morrison, though I doubt they care much about her age. They're angry, and they're making it our problem." "So what do we do?" Jack Henderson had joined them, his sons flanking him. "We're not handing anyone over." "Didn't say we were." Granger's jaw was set. "But we need to deal with this before they make good on that threat. These men don't bluff." "How many are we talking about?" Caleb asked. "Best guess? 8 to 10. The core of the gang is the 3 brothers, Garrett, obviously, plus whoever they've picked up along the way." Granger looked at Deputy Carr. "Tell them what you found." Carr was a lean man with a scar running down his left cheek. "We tracked them to an old line shack in the canyon country, about 15 miles northeast. They're holed up there, but they've got lookouts posted. Can't get close without them seeing us coming." "So we need to draw them out," Caleb said. "That's the idea." Granger's eyes were hard. "We set a trap, make them think they're getting what they want, then close the net." "Using what as bait?" Lillian asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "A wagon heading to Tucson. 2 women visible, armed escort that looks like regular ranch hands." Granger looked at her directly. "They see an opportunity, they'll take it, and when they do, we'll be ready." "No," Caleb said flatly. "It's the only way." "I said no. You're not using her as bait." "It's not your decision to make," Lillian said quietly. Caleb turned to her. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Her voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "These men are terrorizing this entire valley because of me, because I happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now they think I'm something they can own." She met Granger's eyes. "What do you need me to do?" "You get in a wagon with Mrs. Chen and you ride toward Tucson. We'll have armed men hidden in the back, plus riders positioned along the route. When the gang makes their move, we surround them." "And if something goes wrong," Caleb demanded, "then we adapt." Granger's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Look, I know you don't like this, but we're running out of options. These men won't stop until they get what they want, or we put them down." "He's right," Lillian said. She looked at Caleb. "I didn't come out here to hide, and I'm not going to let other people get hurt because I'm too scared to act." "This isn't about being scared." "Yes, it is." Her eyes were clear. "I've been running from my old life for 3 months. Running from my father, from that marriage, from everything I was supposed to be. I'm done running." The words hung in the air between them. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to find some way to change her mind, but he could see the decision was already made. "When?" he asked Granger. "Tomorrow morning. Gives us time to get into position." The marshal looked at Jack. "We'll need to borrow your wagon and 4 good horses, plus any guns you can spare." "You'll have them." Jack's voice was grave. "But I'm coming too. This is my valley they're threatening. Appreciate it." Granger turned back to Caleb. "You're in no shape to ride. Try and stop me." "Caleb," Lillian started. "No." He cut her off. "You want to put yourself in danger? Fine. But I'm going to be there to make sure you come back." Lillian looked like she wanted to argue, but something in his expression must have convinced her it wasn't worth the effort. "All right, but you follow the plan, and you don't do anything that'll get yourself killed." "Same to you." Granger cleared his throat. "Now that we're all agreed to risk our lives together, let's talk details." They spent the rest of the morning planning. The route was straightforward. The main road to Tucson passed through a narrow canyon about 8 miles from the Henderson Ranch. Perfect ambush country, which meant perfect trap country if you were expecting trouble. Granger would position men on both sides of the canyon, hidden in the rocks. Jack and his sons would ride as visible escort, armed but not obviously so. Caleb and the other deputies would be in the back of the wagon, under a tarp, ready to move when the shooting started, and Lillian and Margaret would sit up front, looking like easy targets. The plan had more holes than a moth-eaten blanket, but it was the best they had. That night, Caleb found Lillian sitting on the porch, staring out at the darkness. The temperature had dropped, and she'd wrapped herself in a shawl, but she didn't look cold, just thoughtful. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "It's not my porch." He sat down anyway, lowering himself carefully. His ribs were better, but they still complained about sudden movements. They were quiet for a while, listening to the night sounds. Crickets, distant coyotes, the wind moving through the scrub. "You don't have to do this," Caleb said finally. "We've already had this conversation." "We're having it again." He looked at her profile in the starlight. "Those men are killers. If something goes wrong, then something goes wrong." She turned to face him. "Do you know what my life was like in Boston? I spent every day in a cage made of expectations. What I should wear, what I should say, who I should marry. I was suffocating." Her voice was fierce. "Out here, I can breathe. Even with the danger, even with everything that's happened, I can breathe. I'm not giving that up. Even if it kills you? Especially then." She smiled, but it was sad. Better to die free than live in a cage. Caleb didn't have an answer for that. He understood the sentiment better than she probably knew. He'd felt the same way after the war, when everyone expected him to go back to farming and pretend the last 4 years hadn't happened. "Your father," he said, "the one who arranged that marriage. You ever think about going back?" "Never." The word was absolute. "Even if I could, I wouldn't. He made his choice when he tried to sell me like livestock. I made mine when I left. He might be worried about you. He might be relieved." She pulled the shawl tighter. "I was never the daughter he wanted. Too stubborn, too curious, too willing to argue. The only thing I was good for was marrying well and producing grandchildren." Her laugh was bitter. "Turns out I'm not even good for that." "You're good for a lot of things," Caleb said. "You kept me alive when I should have died. You delivered that calf yesterday like you'd been doing it your whole life. You shot a man who was trying to hurt you, and you didn't fall apart." He paused. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met." Lillian was very still. When she spoke, her voice was quieter. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time." "It's also true." She looked at him then, really looked, and something shifted in the air between them. Caleb felt it like a change in pressure before a storm. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Really, it's not just about returning a favor." "No," he admitted. "It's not." "Then what?" He thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated and messy, and he wasn't even sure he understood it himself. But sitting here in the dark with this woman who'd appeared in his life 3 days ago and turned everything sideways, he figured he owed her honesty. "Because when I look at you, I see someone who refused to settle," he said. "Someone who chose the hard road because the easy one would have destroyed them. And I respect the hell out of that." He met her eyes. "Also, I like you, which is inconvenient, but there it is." Lillian's expression was unreadable. "Inconvenient." "Yeah. You're planning to leave. I'm stuck here, and we're probably both going to die tomorrow fighting a gang of murderers. So the timing's not great." That surprised a laugh out of her. "No, I suppose it's not. But if we survive," Caleb continued, "maybe we could figure out if inconvenient is worth pursuing." "Maybe." She was quiet for a moment. "I never planned to stay anywhere. I was just going to keep moving until I found somewhere that felt right." And nothing feels right yet." She looked out at the darkness. "But this place is starting to feel less wrong." It wasn't a declaration of intent, but it was something. Caleb decided to take it as a good sign. They sat there until the cold drove them inside. Sarah had already banked the fire and gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the soft sounds of people sleeping. "Get some rest," Lillian said. "Tomorrow's going to be hard." "You too." She nodded and headed toward her room. At the doorway, she paused and looked back. "Caleb, don't get yourself killed trying to protect me tomorrow. I mean it. I'll do my best." "Your best usually involves getting shot," but her tone was gentle. "Just be careful." "You too." She disappeared into her room, closing the door softly behind her. Caleb stood there for a moment, then went to his own room and tried to sleep. He managed about 3 hours. Morning came too fast and too cold. Caleb was awake before dawn, checking his borrowed revolver and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The wagon was ready by the time the sun cleared the horizon. Jack had loaded it with supplies to make it look legitimate, barrels and crates that provided cover for the 3 armed men hidden under the tarp. Caleb climbed in carefully, his ribs protesting, and settled into position with Deputy Carr and one of Jack's sons. Lillian and Margaret sat up front, both dressed in plain traveling clothes. Margaret looked terrified. Lillian looked calm, but Caleb could see the tension in her shoulders. "Remember the plan?" Granger said from horseback. "We hit the canyon, you slow down like you're being cautious. That's when they'll make their move. Soon as the shooting starts, you get down and stay down. We'll handle the rest." "And if they don't take the bait?" Lillian asked. "Then we regroup and try something else." Granger's expression was grim. "But they'll take it. These men are too arrogant not to." Jack climbed up next to Margaret and took the reins. His other son mounted a horse, as did Deputy Wilson. They looked like a normal ranch party heading to town. The trap was set. They rolled out just after sunrise. The first few miles passed in tense silence, everyone watching the horizon for signs of trouble. Caleb lay in the back of the wagon, peering through a gap in the tarp, his hand on his gun. The canyon appeared ahead, a narrow cut through red rock walls that rose 30 feet on either side. Perfect ambush territory. Jack slowed the wagon as they entered, the horse's hooves echoing off the stone. Caleb's heart was pounding hard enough that he was sure everyone could hear it. Nothing happened. They were halfway through the canyon when Caleb heard it, the rattle of falling rocks high above. Then a voice called out, "That's far enough." Jack pulled the wagon to a stop. Caleb shifted position carefully, trying to see without being seen. 4 men had appeared on the canyon rim, rifles pointed down. The scarred man from before, the one Lillian had shot, was among them, his shoulder bandaged but his gun steady. "Well now," the scarred man said, "look what we have here. The lady who shot me and her little friend." His smile was vicious. "You girls going somewhere?" "Tucson," Lillian said. Her voice didn't shake. "We're just trying to get to town." "Is that so?" The scarred man gestured to his companions. "See, we heard you were hiding at the Henderson place. Thought we'd have to burn it down to get to you, but here you are, making it easy for us." "We're not hiding from anyone," Margaret said. Her voice was small but defiant. "Sure you're not." The scarred man's eyes tracked over the wagon. "Who's your escort? These boys look like ranch hands, not lawmen." "They're friends," Jack said carefully. "Just making sure we get to town safe." "Mighty friendly." The scarred man was still smiling, but his eyes were cold. "Tell you what, you hand over the women, we let the rest of you ride away. Nobody has to die today." "Not happening," Jack said. "Wrong answer." The shooting started before anyone could move. But it didn't come from the men on the rim. It came from the rocks on either side of the canyon where Granger and his deputies had been waiting. The scarred man dove for cover as bullets ricocheted off the stone. His companions scattered, returning fire wildly. "Now!" Granger's voice echoed through the canyon. Caleb threw off the tarp and came up shooting. The man on the rim closest to him went down with a scream. Deputy Carr was firing methodically, each shot carefully aimed. Jack had already jumped down and pulled Margaret behind the wagon. Lillian was right behind them, her medical bag clutched to her chest. More gunfire erupted from deeper in the canyon. The rest of the gang had been waiting in ambush, but so had more of Granger's men. The whole canyon exploded into chaos. A bullet punched through the side of the wagon inches from Caleb's head. He dropped flat, his ribs screaming in protest, and rolled toward better cover. Another shot kicked up dust near his boot. Through the smoke and noise, he saw the scarred man trying to escape down a narrow path. Caleb brought up his revolver and fired. The shot went wide, but it made the man stumble. Then Lillian was running across the open ground toward a wounded man, one of Jack's sons, down with blood spreading across his leg. "Lillian, get back!" Caleb shouted. She ignored him, sliding to her knees next to the injured man and ripping open her medical bag. Bullets were still flying. She was completely exposed. Caleb swore and ran toward her, firing at anything that moved. He reached her just as a shot cratered the ground where she'd been kneeling. He grabbed her arm and hauled her behind a boulder, the wounded man crawling after them. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded. "My job!" She was already wrapping a tourniquet around the man's leg, her hands steady despite the chaos. "He's bleeding out! You're going to get killed! Then cover me!" Caleb turned and fired at a figure moving along the canyon rim. The man dropped. Around them, the gunfight was reaching a crescendo. Granger's men had the high ground and superior numbers, but the Garrett gang was fighting with desperate fury. The scarred man appeared from behind a rock formation, his rifle coming up. Caleb saw it happening in slow motion, the barrel swinging toward Lillian, the man's finger tightening on the trigger. Caleb threw himself sideways, putting himself between Lillian and the shot. The bullet hit him high in the left shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard, the revolver flying from his hand. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Lillian scream his name. Then everything got confused. More gunfire. Shouting. The scarred man going down under a hail of bullets from Granger's position. The remaining gang members throwing down their weapons and raising their hands. Suddenly, it was over. Caleb lay on his back, staring up at the strip of sky visible between the canyon walls. His shoulder was on fire and his ribs weren't much better. He could hear Lillian's voice but couldn't make out the words. Then her face appeared above him, pale and frightened. "Don't you dare die," she said. "Wasn't planning on it," he managed. "You're shot." I noticed. Her hands were on his shoulder, probing gently. "Went clean through. That's good, but you're bleeding badly." She looked around wildly. "I need bandages." Someone thrust a roll of cloth at her. She packed the wound with quick, efficient movements that hurt worse than the bullet itself. Caleb gritted his teeth and tried not to embarrass himself. "You jumped in front of a bullet," Lillian said. Her voice was shaking now that the immediate crisis was past. "You absolute idiot. He was aiming at you." "So you decided to get shot instead?" "Seemed like the thing to do at the time." "I'm going to kill you myself when you're healed." "Get in line." Granger appeared, looking grim but satisfied. "We got 6 of them, 2 dead, 4 in custody, the rest scattered." He looked down at Caleb. "You hit bad?" "I'll live," Caleb said. "Through and through," Lillian confirmed. "He'll need stitching, but the bone's intact." "Good." Granger surveyed the canyon. This could have gone worse. Jack's son, the one Lillian had been treating, was being helped to his feet by his father. The kid was pale, but alive. 2 of Granger's deputies were wounded, but mobile, and scattered across the canyon floor were the bodies of the men who'd been terrorizing the valley for months. It was over. They got Caleb into the wagon with more care than efficiency. Every jolt sent fresh pain through his shoulder and ribs, but he kept his teeth clenched and tried not to complain. Lillian sat next to him, her hand resting on his good shoulder. Her fingers were trembling slightly. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "We're even now." "That's not how it works." "Sure it is. You saved me, I saved you. Clean slate." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You could have died, but I didn't." "You could have." Her voice cracked slightly. "And it would have been my fault." Caleb reached up with his good hand and covered hers. "It would have been the choice I made. Not your fault." She looked at him with eyes that were too bright. "I don't want to lose you." "You're not getting rid of me that easy." The wagon jolted over a rock and Caleb saw stars. Lillian's grip tightened on his shoulder. "Hang on," she said. "We'll be back at the ranch soon. I'll fix you up properly. Looking forward to it." She almost smiled at that. Liar. The trip back to the Henderson place took forever. By the time they arrived, Caleb was half delirious with pain, and Sarah had to help Lillian get him inside. They laid him out on the same bed he'd been using, and Lillian went to work with the focused intensity he'd come to recognize. She cleaned the wound, stitched it closed, and wrapped his shoulder tight enough to restrict movement. 24 hours of bed rest, she said when she was finished. "And this time, I mean it." "Yes, ma'am." "I'm serious, Caleb. You've got cracked ribs and now a bullet wound. Your body needs time to heal." "I'll behave." She didn't look convinced, but she was too tired to argue. She slumped in the chair next to the bed, her hair coming loose from its pins and her dress stained with his blood. "You should rest too," he said, in a minute. But she was asleep before the minute was up, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle and her hand still clutching the edge of his blanket. Caleb watched her sleep and thought about everything that had happened in the last 4 days. A week ago, he'd been a rancher with a quiet life and no complications. Now, he was shot twice. His ranch might be burned to the ground, and he was falling for a woman who'd probably leave as soon as the roads were safe. Life was funny that way. He closed his eyes and let the exhaustion take him under. When he woke again, it was dark outside and someone had covered Lillian with a blanket. She was still in the chair, still sleeping. And despite everything, the pain, the uncertainty, the mess waiting for them tomorrow, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The hope lasted about 3 days. That's how long it took for reality to reassert itself in the form of Deputy Marshal Granger standing in the Hendersons' kitchen with news that made everyone go quiet. "The roads are washed out," he said. "Flash flood came through the canyon last night, took out the bridge and half the trail to Tucson." Lillian looked up from the pot of stew she'd been stirring. "How long until it's passable?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. Depends on when the ground dries out enough to rebuild." Granger accepted the coffee Sarah offered him. "Which means you're stuck here for the duration." "Here specifically?" Lillian asked. "Or just in the valley?" "Valley's fine, but nobody's getting to Tucson or anywhere else east of here until we get that bridge rebuilt." He looked at Caleb, who was sitting at the table with his arm in a sling. "Your ranch is still standing, by the way. I rode past it yesterday. Looks like the gang never made it that far." "Small mercies," Caleb muttered. His shoulder was healing, but it itched like hell, and the enforced inactivity was making him mean. "You planning to go back?" Granger asked. "Soon as I can ride without falling off." Lillian made a noise that suggested she had opinions about that timeline, but she didn't voice them. She'd learned that arguing with Caleb when his mind was made up was like arguing with a fence post, technically possible, but ultimately pointless. "What about Mrs. Morrison?" Margaret asked. She'd been helping Sarah with the laundry, but had come in when she heard Granger's voice. "She can't stay here forever. Actually talked to her about that this morning," Granger said. "She's got family in California. Soon as the road's clear, she's heading west to live with her sister." He paused. "She wanted me to thank you, Mrs. Chen, for everything you did. Said you saved her life." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't do anything. You stayed with her when she had nothing and nobody. That's not nothing." Granger's voice was gentle. "She also said if you ever need anything, you write to her. She means it." Margaret nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The conversation moved on to practical matters. Who needed supplies? Which ranches still needed help with repairs? What to do about the spring roundup that was supposed to happen in 2 weeks? Caleb listened with half his attention, the other half on Lillian. She'd been different since the shootout. Quieter. More withdrawn. She still helped around the Henderson place, still checked Caleb's wounds with professional detachment, but something had changed. Like she'd pulled back from whatever connection had been building between them. He didn't know how to ask about it without sounding like he was prying. After Granger left, Caleb found her in the barn checking on Jack's horses. She had her medical bag open and was examining a mare's injured leg with focused attention. "Need help?" he asked. "No." She didn't look up. "And you shouldn't be walking around. That shoulder needs rest." "It's been resting for 3 days. Any more rest and it'll forget how to work." "That's not how healing works." "Close enough." He leaned against a stall door, watching her work. "You've been avoiding me. I've been busy." "You've been avoiding me," he repeated, "ever since the canyon." Her hand stilled on the mare's leg. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then she carefully packed away her supplies and stood up. "You almost died because of me," she said quietly. "Again. I made a choice to throw yourself in front of a bullet meant for me." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were fierce. "Do you have any idea what it was like watching you go down, seeing all that blood and knowing it should have been mine? Better me than you." "No." The word was sharp. "It's not better, it's just different, and it's not a trade I wanted to make." Caleb straightened up, ignoring the pull in his shoulder. "So what, you're pulling away because you're mad I didn't let you get shot?" "I'm pulling away because I can't do this." She gestured between them. "Whatever this is, I can't let myself care about someone who's going to get himself killed trying to protect me." "Little late for that." "I know." Her voice cracked. "That's the problem." They stood there as the barn with dust motes floating in the afternoon light and the smell of hay and horses all around them, and Caleb felt something shift in his chest. "I'm not planning on dying," he said. "Nobody ever is. It happens anyway." "So what's the alternative? We just pretend there's nothing between us?" "There is no us." But her voice lacked conviction. "I'm leaving as soon as the road's clear. You knew that." "Yeah, I did. Doesn't change how I feel." "Caleb." "I'm not asking you to stay," he interrupted. "I'm not asking you for anything, but I'm also not going to pretend I don't care about you just because it's inconvenient." Lillian closed her eyes. "This is a mistake." "Probably, but I'm pretty good at those." That surprised a laugh out of her. Short and sharp, but real. When she opened her eyes again, some of the distance in them had softened. You're impossible, she said. I've been told. And stubborn. That too. And you're going to break my heart when you get yourself killed doing something heroic and stupid. I'll try to avoid that. She shook her head, but she was almost smiling. You're not going to make this easy, are you? Haven't made anything easy in my life. Don't see why I'd start now. Lillian walked over to him, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her gray eyes. If we do this, if we even try, you have to promise me something. What? No more jumping in front of bullets. No more sacrificing yourself because you think I'm worth more than you are. Her voice was fierce. We're equals or we're nothing. Caleb thought about that, about what she was asking and what it meant. I can't promise I won't try to protect you. I'm not asking you not to protect me. I'm asking you not to die for me. There's a difference. All right, he said. I can promise that. Good. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his jaw. Because I'm starting to think this godforsaken frontier might be worth staying in after all. Before he could respond, she kissed him. It was brief and chaste and completely changed everything. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed and her eyes were bright. We should get back to the house. Sarah will wonder where we are. Let her wonder. Caleb. Fine. He stepped back, giving her space. But we're talking about this later. I know. They walked back to the house in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Easier. Like something had been settled, even if the details were still fuzzy. Sarah took one look at them when they entered the kitchen and smiled knowingly, but she had the grace not to comment. That night after dinner, Caleb sat on the porch with Jack and his sons, discussing the work that needed doing once he could get back to his ranch. The list was long and getting longer the more he thought about it. You're going to need help, Jack said, especially with that shoulder still healing. I'll manage. You'll kill yourself trying. Jack tamped tobacco into his pipe. What you need is a partner, someone to share the load. I work alone. You worked alone, Jack corrected. Past tense. Way I see it, you've got a choice. You can keep being stubborn and run yourself into the ground, or you can accept that maybe having someone around wouldn't be the worst thing. Caleb knew what Jack was really saying. Everyone at the Henderson place knew about him and Lillian by now. Hard to keep secrets when you were all living on top of each other. She's leaving when the road's clear, he said. Maybe. Or maybe she's looking for a reason to stay. Jack lit his pipe and puffed thoughtfully. Woman like that doesn't come along often. Be ashamed to let her go without at least asking. Asking what? If she wants something more than just passing through. I can't give her what she's used to. I've got a half-broken ranch and debts I'm still paying off from last year. She came from money, from a life I can't even imagine. And she left all that behind, Jack pointed out, which suggests maybe she doesn't want what she's used to. Maybe she wants something different. Before Caleb could respond, Margaret came out onto the porch. She'd been withdrawn since the shootout, spending most of her time with Mrs. Morrison, but tonight she looked lighter somehow. Mr. Rourke, she said, can I talk to you? Of course. Jack and his sons took the hint and headed inside. Margaret sat down in the chair Jack had vacated, twisting her hands in her lap. I wanted to thank you, she said, for everything you did. If you and Miss Hart hadn't helped us, if that marshal hadn't shown up, she stopped, collecting herself. I'd be dead or worse. So thank you. You don't need to thank me. I do, though, because you didn't have to help. You were hurt, and you had your own problems, but you helped anyway. She looked up at him. I've been thinking about what to do next, where to go. Mrs. Morrison's going to California, but I don't have family anywhere. I was thinking maybe I could find work in town, but Miss Hart suggested something else. What's that? She said you might need help at your ranch, someone to cook and keep house while you're recovering. Margaret spoke quickly, like she was afraid he'd say no before she finished. I'm a good worker. I don't eat much, and I can handle hard labor. I wouldn't be any trouble. Caleb studied her. She was watching him with desperate hope, and he realized she wasn't just looking for work. She was looking for a place to belong. The Morrison ranch was gone, burned to the ground along with the life she'd built there. I can't pay much, he said. I don't need much. It's hard work, lonely sometimes. I don't mind lonely. I mind being useless. Her voice was firm. Let me help, Mr. Rourke, please. He thought about his empty ranch house and all the work that needed doing. Thought about coming back to a cold stove and unmade beds and nobody to talk to except the horses. All right, he said, you can come work for me, but if it doesn't suit, you're free to leave. No hard feelings. Margaret's face lit up. Thank you. You won't regret this, I promise. After she left, Lillian appeared in the doorway. She'd been listening, he realized. That was kind of you, she said. It was practical. I need the help. It was kind, she insisted. You could have said no. So could you, when you found me bleeding in the middle of nowhere. That was different. How? She came and sat next to him. Because I'm a doctor. Helping people is what I do. And I'm a rancher who needs help running his ranch. Same principle. If you say so. But she was smiling. Margaret's a good woman. She'll work hard for you. I know. He paused. She said you suggested it. I might have mentioned you'd need help, and that she was looking for a place to go. That was presumptuous. Was it wrong? No, he admitted, but still presumptuous. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. The temperature was dropping, but neither of them moved to go inside. I've been thinking, Lillian said after a while, about what you said earlier, about not pretending there's nothing between us. And you're right, there is something. I don't know what to call it yet, but it's there. She looked at him. The question is what we do about it. What do you want to do about it? I don't know. Her voice was honest. Part of me wants to run. That's what I'm good at. Seeing trouble coming and getting out before it gets complicated. But another part of me thinks maybe running isn't the answer this time. What changed? You got shot protecting me. And instead of making me want to leave, it made me want to stay and make sure it never happens again. She shook her head. Which is backwards and probably stupid, but there it is. Caleb reached over and took her hand. Her fingers were cold and he rubbed them gently to warm them up. I meant what I said, he told her. I'm not asking you to stay, but if you want to, if you need a place to figure things out, my ranch is yours. No strings, no expectations. That's a dangerous offer. I'm a dangerous man. She laughed at that, a real laugh that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. You're many things, Caleb Rourke, but dangerous isn't one of them. You clearly haven't seen me try to cook. I've seen your pantry. I'm already terrified. They sat there until the cold drove them inside, their hands still linked. And when they finally separated to go to their respective rooms, Caleb felt that unfamiliar sensation of hope again. Maybe this time it would last longer than 3 days. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Caleb woke to find his shoulder less painful than it had been. Still not good, but better. He could move it without seeing stars, which he counted as progress. He found Lillian in the kitchen helping Sarah with breakfast. She looked tired, but her movements were steady as she kneaded bread dough. Morning, he said. Morning. How's the shoulder? Better? Let me see. She wiped her hands on her apron and came over, unbuttoning his shirt with clinical efficiency. Her fingers probed the wound gently, checking for heat or swelling. It's healing well, she said. Another week, and you should have most of your range of motion back. What about riding? What about resting like I told you? I've been resting for almost a week. The ranch won't run itself. Lillian sighed. You're impossible. You mentioned that yesterday. It bears repeating. But she was smiling slightly as she rebuttoned his shirt. If you insist on being stubborn, at least take it slow. No heavy lifting, no sudden movements, and if you start bleeding again, I'm tying you to a bed until you're completely healed. Is that a threat or a promise? She swatted his good shoulder. Behave. Jack came in from outside, stamping mud off his boots. Granger just rode up, says he needs to talk to everyone. They gathered in the main room, Caleb and Lillian, Jack and Sarah, Margaret and Mrs. Morrison, even Jack's sons. Granger stood by the fireplace with his hat in his hands, looking grave. We got word this morning, he said. The rest of the Garrett gang has been apprehended. They tried to cross the border into Mexico but ran into a patrol. 3 more men in custody, plus evidence linking them to at least a dozen other crimes across the territory. So it's over? Sarah asked. It's over. Granger's expression softened. You can all go home, or wherever you're planning to go. The valley's safe. The relief in the room was palpable. Mrs. Morrison started crying quietly. Margaret hugged her, both women holding on to each other like they were afraid to let go. When can we travel? Lillian asked. Roads are still bad, but they're passable on horseback. Wagon travel won't be safe for another week or so. Granger looked at Caleb. You planning to head back to your place? Soon as I can saddle a horse. I'll ride with you. Make sure the gang didn't leave any surprises. Appreciate it. They spent the rest of the morning preparing to leave. It felt strange after almost 2 weeks of living in close quarters with the Hendersons, like leaving family, even though they'd known each other less than a month. Sarah packed food for the journey and fussed over Caleb's shoulder. Jack made sure their horses were sound and their supplies were adequate. His sons checked weapons and tested saddles. Margaret pulled Lillian aside at one point, speaking in low tones. Caleb couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw Lillian hug the older woman and Margaret wipe her eyes. By noon, they were ready to leave. Caleb, Lillian, Margaret, and Deputy Marshal Granger mounted up, while the Hendersons stood on the porch to see them off. "You're welcome back any time," Sarah said, "all of you." "Thank you for everything," Lillian replied. "We wouldn't have survived without your help." "Nonsense, you'd have figured it out." But Sarah's eyes were warm. "You take care of that stubborn rancher. Don't let him do anything stupid." "I'll try." They rode out in the early afternoon, the sun warm on their backs. The journey to Caleb's ranch took about 3 hours at an easy pace. As they got closer, Caleb felt tension building in his shoulders. He hadn't seen the place in almost 2 weeks. Anything could have happened. But when they crested the last rise and his ranch came into view, it looked exactly as he'd left it. The house still stood, the barn was intact, and his 3 horses were grazing in the corral like nothing had happened. "Well," Granger said, "looks like you got lucky." They rode down to the house and dismounted. Caleb walked through the room slowly, checking for signs of intrusion. Nothing had been disturbed. Either the gang had never made it this far, or they'd decided his place wasn't worth the effort. Margaret immediately set to work opening windows and sweeping dust. Lillian checked the medical supplies she'd left behind, inventorying what was still usable. Granger did a circuit of the property, checking the barn and outbuildings. When he came back, he was satisfied. "Place is secure," he said. "I'll head back to town and file my report. You need anything, you send word." "Will do. Thanks for everything, Marshal. Just doing my job." Granger tipped his hat to Lillian. "Ma'am, you ever decide you want to hang up a shingle as a doctor, you let me know. Town could use someone with your skills." "I'll think about it," Lillian said. After Granger left, the 3 of them stood in the yard looking at the house. It felt too quiet after all the chaos of the last 2 weeks. "Well," Margaret said, "I should start making supper. You'll both be hungry after the ride." She went inside, leaving Caleb and Lillian alone. "So," Lillian said, "this is your ranch?" "This is it. Not much to look at." "It's solid, well built." She walked over to the porch and ran her hand along the railing. "Needs some work, but the bones are good. That's one way to put it." She turned to face him. "Is the offer still open? About staying while I figure things out?" Caleb's heart started beating faster. "Yeah, it's still open. No strings? No expectations?" "None." "Then I'll stay." She said it simply, like it wasn't the most important thing anyone had said to him in years. "At least for a while. Until the road's clear and I can make a proper decision about where to go next." "All right." He tried to keep his voice steady. "There's a spare room. It's small, but it's private." "That'll work." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the decision settling between them. Then Lillian smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "So," she said, "where do we start?" "Start with what?" "Fixing this place up. You said it needs work. Might as well make myself useful while I'm here." Caleb looked at his ranch, at the sagging fence that needed mending, the barn roof that leaked in 3 places, the garden plot that had gone to weeds, at all the work that had been piling up while he was recovering. Then he looked at Lillian, standing in his yard in her dusty traveling clothes, with her medical bag at her feet and determination in her eyes. "We start with the fence," he said, "and we work our way in." "Sounds like a plan." They walked toward the barn together, already discussing what needed doing first. Behind them, smoke started rising from the chimney as Margaret got the stove going. The horses nickered softly in the corral. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold. It wasn't perfect. Caleb's shoulder still hurt, and Lillian was still planning to leave eventually, and there were 100 problems waiting to be solved. But standing here in the late afternoon light with this woman who'd appeared in his life like a miracle and refused to leave even when things got dangerous, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt like he was home. And maybe, just maybe, so did she. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Margaret handled the house and the cooking, leaving Caleb and Lillian to work on the ranch. He showed her how to mend fence, how to read the signs of weather in the sky, how to gentle a skittish horse. She showed him proper wound care, taught him about herbs that could help with pain, and corrected his terrible technique for splinting injuries. They worked side by side in the spring sunshine, not talking much, but comfortable in the silence. Sometimes Caleb would catch her looking out at the horizon with an expression he couldn't read. Other times she'd catch him watching her and raise an eyebrow in question. "What?" she'd ask. "Nothing. Just thinking." "About?" "How strange life is. 3 weeks ago I didn't know you existed. Now you're fixing my fence and arguing about the proper way to treat saddle sores." "Life is strange," she agreed, "but strange isn't always bad." On the fourth day, a wagon arrived carrying supplies from town and a letter for Lillian. She took it with trembling hands and retreated to the porch to read it. Caleb gave her space, working in the barn with Margaret to sort through winter supplies they hadn't gotten around to putting away. But he watched her through the open door, saw her read the letter twice, and then sit very still. When he finally went to check on her, she was staring at nothing with the letter crumpled in her fist. "Bad news?" he asked. "It's from my father." Her voice was flat. "Someone told him where I am. He's demanding I come home immediately." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." She looked up at him. "He says if I don't return within the month, he's cutting me off completely. No money, no family, nothing." "You have money?" "A trust fund. My mother left it to me. It's enough to live on if I'm careful." She laughed bitterly. "He always said he'd take it away if I disobeyed him. I didn't think he'd actually do it." Caleb sat down next to her. "What do you want to do?" "I want to tell him to go to hell." The words came out fierce. "I want to burn this letter and never think about him again. But that money is the only thing keeping me independent. Without it, I'm dependent on someone else's charity. I hate that. I hate needing help. It's not charity if you're working for it." "Isn't it?" She met his eyes. "What am I doing here, really? Playing at being a rancher's wife? Pretending this life is something I can sustain?" "You're doing what you need to do to figure out what you want," Caleb said carefully. "That's not pretending. That's surviving." "Maybe." She crumpled the letter tighter. "Or maybe I'm just running again, and this time I'll run until I have nothing left." "Then don't run. Stand still. Make a choice and stick with it." "What choice?" Her voice broke. "Go back to Boston and marry a man I hate, or stay here and be dependent on your kindness. Those aren't real choices. There's a third option." "What?" Caleb took a breath, knowing he was about to take a leap he couldn't come back from. "You stay here, not as a guest or as hired help, as a partner." Lillian stared at him. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about a real partnership. You bring your medical skills, I bring the ranch. We build something together. No one dependent on anyone, just two people working toward the same goal." "That's marriage you're describing." "Maybe. Or maybe it's just two people who don't want to be alone anymore." He held her gaze. "I know it's not what you're used to. I know it's not safe or easy or anything you planned, but it's real, and it's yours if you want it." Lillian was very still. "You're asking me to marry you. I'm asking you to stay. How we define that is up to you." She looked down at the letter in her hand, then out at the ranch spreading before them. The afternoon light caught in her hair and made her eyes shine. "I don't love you," she said finally. "I know. I might never love you. That's a risk I'm willing to take." "Why?" The question was raw. "Why would you tie yourself to someone who might leave the moment something better comes along?" "Because I don't think you will," Caleb said simply. "I think you're looking for a place to belong, and I think maybe, this place could be it." Lillian stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, her arms wrapped around herself. Caleb waited, his heart hammering. When she turned back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "If I stay," she said, "I need to be more than someone's wife. I need to be a doctor, a real one, with patience and a practice. The town needs a doctor, has needed one for years. And I need to keep my independence, my own money, my own choices. I'm not your father. I don't want to control you." "You say that now." "I'll say it every day if I have to." She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "I'll stay. We'll try this partnership and see where it leads." "No promises?" "No promises," she confirmed. "Except this one. I won't lie to you. If I want to leave, I'll tell you. And you won't try to stop me. Deal." They shook hands on it, formal and absurd and somehow exactly right. Then Lillian pulled him into a fierce hug that made his shoulder protest, but he didn't care. "This is probably a terrible idea," she whispered against his chest. "Probably," he agreed. "We're both going to regret it. Most likely. But we're doing it anyway." "Yeah, we are." She pulled back and wiped her eyes. "I need to write to my father. Tell him I'm not coming back." "You sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." She managed a shaky smile. "Seems to be my new philosophy." That night they had a small celebration, just the three of them eating Margaret's stew and drinking whiskey that burned going down. Margaret cried when they told her about the partnership, happy tears that she tried to hide. "You'll be good for each other," she said. "I can tell." "Or we'll drive each other crazy," Lillian said. "That too." Margaret raised her glass. "To new beginnings." They drank to that, and to the future that was uncertain, but theirs to shape. Outside, the Arizona night was deep and vast and full of stars. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, and three people who'd found each other through violence and chance began to build something that looked almost like family. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was real. And sometimes Caleb thought, as he watched Lillian laugh at something Margaret said, real was enough. The letter to her father took Lillian 3 days to write. Caleb found her in the spare room that had become hers, surrounded by crumpled paper. She had ink on her fingers and frustration written across her face. "How do you tell someone you're done being their property?" she asked without preamble. "Directly, I'd imagine. I've tried direct. It sounds angry. Then I tried diplomatic, and it sounds weak." She threw down her pen. "I don't know how to do this." Caleb picked up one of the discarded attempts and read it. The handwriting was precise, but the words were cautious, hedging, not like her at all. "Stop trying to explain yourself to him," he said. "You don't owe him that. He's my father. And he tried to sell you into a marriage you didn't want. That cancels out a lot of filial obligation." Lillian looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started writing. This time the words came quickly, her pen moving with decisive strokes. When she was done, she read it aloud. "Father, I am not returning to Boston. I have made a life here that suits me, and I intend to keep it. Do with my trust fund as you see fit. I no longer require your money or your approval. Lillian." She looked up. "Too harsh?" "Sounds honest." "He's going to be furious. Let him." Caleb sat down across from her. "You can't live your life worried about his feelings when he never worried about yours." She folded the letter carefully and sealed it. "That's it then. Once I send this, there's no going back." "You want to go back?" "No, but that doesn't make this easier." She set the letter aside. "I keep thinking about my mother. She would have hated what he tried to do to me, but she's gone and he acts like her opinion died with her." "What was she like?" "Kind. Smart. She wanted to be a doctor herself, but her father forbade it, so she married mine instead." Lillian smiled sadly. "She taught me everything she knew, said I could be whatever I wanted, as long as I was brave enough to fight for it." "Sounds like you're doing exactly that." "I hope so." She stood up. "I need to post this before I lose my nerve." "Will you ride to town with me?" "Not sure you need an escort anymore." "I don't, but I'd like the company." They rode into town the next morning, Margaret staying behind to manage the ranch. The settlement was barely big enough to call itself a town. One main street, a dozen buildings, and a population that seemed to consist entirely of hard men and harder women. The general store doubled as the post office. The proprietor, a weather-beaten man named Decker, took Lillian's letter and promised to put it on the next stage east. "That'll be 2 bits," he said. Lillian paid him and then paused. "Mr. Decker, do you know if the town has a doctor?" "Had one. Died last winter. Influenza." Decker squinted at her. "Why, you in the market?" "I have medical training. I was wondering if there might be need for my services." Decker's expression changed from suspicious to calculating. "You any good?" "I kept that man alive." Lillian nodded at Caleb. "After he got shot twice and cracked 3 ribs. That's so?" Decker looked Caleb up and down. "You do look surprisingly healthy for a man who should be dead." "She's good," Caleb confirmed. "Well then," Decker leaned against the counter. "We've been needing a doctor something fierce. Got a pregnant woman due in a month who's scared out of her mind. Got old Tom Patterson with a leg that won't heal. Got half a dozen other folks with ailments they're just living with because there's nobody to treat them. I'd need a place to work, Lillian said, and supplies. Old Doc's office is still standing, been sitting empty since he passed. Place is yours if you want it, along with whatever supplies he left behind. Decker's eyes narrowed. Question is, what do you want in return? Fair payment for my services and respect. I'm not going to be treated like a curiosity or a joke because I'm a woman. Fair enough? You patch people up proper and they'll respect you just fine. You don't, well, he shrugged. Frontier doesn't suffer fools long regardless of what's between their legs. It was crude but honest. Lillian seemed to appreciate that. When can I see the office? She asked. Right now if you want, follow me. They walked down the street to a small building set back from the main road. It had a covered porch and windows on two sides. And when Decker unlocked the door, Caleb could see it had been a proper medical office once. Shelves lined the walls, still stocked with bottles and jars. An examination table stood in the center of the room, and a desk occupied one corner. Everything was covered in dust but intact. Lillian walked through slowly, touching things with reverent fingers. She opened drawers and examined instruments, checked the contents of bottles, ran her hands over the examination table. This will work, she said finally. When can I start? Soon as you're ready, I'll spread the word. Decker looked at Caleb. You all right with your woman working in town? She's not my woman, Caleb said. She's her own woman. What she does is her choice. Decker grunted. Modern thinking. Don't know if I approve. Don't much care if you do, Lillian said pleasantly, but I appreciate you giving me the chance. They spent the rest of the day cleaning the office and taking inventory. What the previous doctor had left behind was extensive but outdated. Lillian made lists of what she needed, her excitement barely contained. I'll need to order supplies from Tucson, she said, and some things from further east, but this is a good foundation. How are you going to pay for it? Caleb asked. If your father cuts you off, I have some money saved, enough to get started. She looked around the office with something like wonder. I can do this. I can actually do this. Never doubted it. That night they ate dinner at the ranch, and Lillian told Margaret about the office. Margaret was thrilled, already planning how she could help manage appointments and keep the place organized. You'll need someone to handle the business side, she said. I'm good with numbers and I'm organized. Let me help. You already have a job here, Lillian pointed out. I can do both. The house doesn't need constant attention, and Mr. Rourke's not exactly demanding. Margaret's eyes were bright. Please, I want to be useful. You are useful. I want to be more than useful. I want to matter. Lillian looked at Caleb, who shrugged. Up to you. All right, Lillian said. We'll try it and see how it works. They spent the next 2 weeks transforming the office into something functional. Word spread quickly about the new doctor, and people started showing up with ailments ranging from minor to serious. Lillian treated them all with the same focused competence, never flinching from difficult cases. She set bones, delivered a baby who came early, treated infections, and handled emergencies with calm efficiency. The town's initial skepticism faded as people realized she knew what she was doing. Even the most hardened ranchers grudgingly admitted that having a doctor around, woman or not, was better than the alternative. Caleb watched her thrive in a way she hadn't at the ranch. She was meant for this kind of work, he realized. The healing, the problem-solving, the direct impact she could have on people's lives. One evening, after she'd been practicing for 3 weeks, she came home exhausted and triumphant. I saved a child today, she said. Boy fell out of a tree and cracked his skull. He was bleeding so badly his mother thought he was dying. But I got the bleeding stopped and cleaned the wound, and he's going to be fine. That's good work. It felt good. She sat down heavily. Better than anything I did in Boston. There I was, just my father's daughter, helping him look competent. Here, I'm actually making a difference. You made a difference from the moment you found me bleeding in the dirt, Caleb said. That was luck. That was skill and kindness and stubbornness. He poured her coffee. You're good at this, Lillian. Better than good. She took the coffee gratefully. Sometimes I can't believe this is my life now. 3 months ago, I was miserable in Boston, trapped in a life I hated. Now I'm in the middle of the Arizona frontier treating cowboys and ranchers, and actually enjoying it. No regrets? Some. She was quiet for a moment. I miss my mother. I wish she could see this. She would have loved it. She'd be proud of you. I hope so. Lillian looked at him. What about you? Any regrets about partnering with a woman who's never home because she's too busy working? None. He meant it. You're doing what you were meant to do. I respect that. Even though it means we barely see each other? We see each other enough? He paused. Unless you want to see more of each other. I don't know what I want, she admitted. This partnership we have, it works. But it's strange, too. We're not married, but we're not exactly friends either. I don't know what to call what we are. Does it need a name? Doesn't it? Caleb thought about that. I figure we're two people who found each other when we needed finding. We're making something that works for both of us. That's enough for now. And later? Later we'll figure out later. It was vague but honest, and Lillian seemed to accept it. She finished her coffee and headed to bed, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts. The truth was, he was falling for her. Had been since that first day when she'd looked at his wounds and decided he was worth saving, but he also knew she wasn't ready to hear that. Maybe she never would be. He could live with that. He'd lived with harder things. 2 days later, everything changed. Caleb was repairing fence line when he saw the rider approaching. The man was dressed too well to be a ranch hand and rode with the kind of careful posture that suggested he wasn't comfortable on a horse. "Can I help you?" Caleb called out. The man dismounted with obvious relief. "I'm looking for Miss Lillian Hart. I was told she might be here." "Who's asking?" "My name is Thomas Whitmore. I'm an attorney from Boston." He pulled out a card and handed it to Caleb. "I have urgent business with Miss Hart regarding her family estate." Caleb's stomach dropped. "She's in town, at the doctor's office." "Doctor's office?" Whitmore looked confused. "She's the doctor. Come on, I'll take you there." They rode to town in tense silence. Caleb's mind was racing, trying to figure out what kind of urgent business required an attorney to travel all the way from Boston. They found Lillian treating a ranch hand who'd caught his arm on barbed wire. She looked up when they entered, her expression going blank when she saw Whitmore. "Mr. Whitmore," she said flatly. "What are you doing here?" "Miss Hart." Whitmore removed his hat. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I have news that couldn't be delivered by letter." "What news?" Whitmore glanced at Caleb and the injured ranch hand. "Perhaps we could speak privately?" "Anything you need to say, you can say in front of them." Lillian's voice was hard. "What's this about?" Whitmore sighed. "Your father passed away 2 weeks ago. Heart failure. It was sudden and, by all accounts, painless." The room went very still. Lillian's face showed nothing, but Caleb saw her hands tighten on the bandage she was holding. "I see," she said finally. "Thank you for traveling all this way to tell me." "There's more." Whitmore pulled papers from his bag. "Your father's will was quite specific. He left the bulk of his estate to you. The house, his medical practice, his investments, everything." Lillian set down the bandage carefully. "He cut me off. Said if I didn't return, I'd get nothing. He said a lot of things in anger, but his actual will, which he never changed, leaves everything to you." Whitmore laid the papers on the examination table. "You're a wealthy woman, Miss Hart. Independently wealthy by any measure." Caleb watched her process this. The ranch hand, sensing this was a moment he shouldn't be part of, made his excuses and left. "How much?" Lillian asked. Whitmore named a figure that made Caleb's head spin. It was more money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes of ranching. "That's—" Lillian stopped, started again. "That's impossible. It's quite real, I assure you. The estate has been valued, and the funds are ready to be transferred to your name." Whitmore pulled out more papers. "Of course, you'll need to return to Boston to claim it. There are legal matters to settle, property to manage, decisions to be made about the medical practice." "Return to Boston," Lillian repeated. "Yes. I understand you've made a life here, but surely you see this changes things." Whitmore's tone was gently condescending. "You have obligations now, responsibilities. You can't simply abandon them." "Can't I?" Lillian's voice was sharp. "I left once. What makes you think I won't do it again?" "Because this time you'd be walking away from a fortune, from everything your father built." Whitmore looked around the small, dusty office. "Surely forgive me, this rustic practice can't compare to what you could have in Boston." "You'd be surprised what things are worth," Lillian said coldly. Whitmore seemed to realize he'd overstepped. "I apologize. I didn't mean to imply—" "Yes, you did." Lillian picked up the papers. How long do I have to make a decision? The law requires you to claim the inheritance within 6 months, or it passes to your father's colleagues. But the sooner you return, the better. These matters are complex. I need time to think. Of course. I'm staying at the hotel in Tucson. You can reach me there. Whitmore put his hat back on. Miss Hart, I know this is difficult, but please consider carefully. Opportunities like this don't come twice. After he left, Lillian stood very still, staring at the papers in her hands. You all right? Caleb asked. I don't know. She looked up at him. He's dead. My father is dead and I feel nothing. Shouldn't I feel something? You feel what you feel. No right or wrong to it. I should be sad or relieved or angry, something. Her voice cracked. But I just feel empty. Caleb crossed the room and pulled her into a careful hug. She stood rigid for a moment, then collapsed against him, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. They stood like that for a long time, her crying out years of complicated grief while he held her and said nothing because there was nothing to say. Eventually she pulled back, wiping her eyes. I'm sorry. Don't be. I got tears all over your shirt. It'll dry. She managed a weak smile. Always so practical. One of us has to be. He paused. What are you going to do? I don't know. She looked at the papers again. This is everything I thought I wanted when I left. Financial independence, freedom from needing anyone's approval or help. But now that I have it, I don't know if I want it anymore. You don't have to decide today, don't I? She met his eyes. Be honest, Caleb. If I go back to Boston, I'm not coming back here. We both know that. Once I'm there, with all that money and all those obligations, this life will seem like a strange dream I had once. Maybe. Definitely. She set the papers down. So I need to decide, do I want this life or that one? Because I can't have both. Why not? Because Boston and Arizona are two different worlds. I can't be a frontier doctor and a Boston society woman at the same time. Says who? Caleb leaned against the examination table. Seems to me you could do whatever you want. Keep the money, hire someone to manage the estate, and stay here. Or go back, sell everything, and come back with enough money to build a real hospital here. Or split your time between both places. Point is, you've got options now. I've got too many options. That's the problem. She laughed bitterly. 3 months ago, I had no choices. Now I have so many I don't know which way to turn. Then take your time. Think it through. You've got 6 months. 6 months. She looked around the office. I've been here less than that, and it already feels like home. That should tell you something. It tells me I'm good at running away and starting over. Doesn't mean I'm good at staying. The words stung more than Caleb wanted to admit. You think that's what you've been doing? Running away? Isn't it? She met his eyes. I ran from Boston. I ran from my father. I ran from that marriage. And if I stay here, am I staying because I want to or because I'm too scared to go back? Only you can answer that. I know. She rubbed her face tiredly. I need to think. Can you give me some space? I need to be alone for a while. Of course. Caleb left her there, surrounded by her medical supplies and her complicated choices. He rode back to the ranch feeling like he'd been punched in the gut. Margaret took one look at his face when he got home and sat him down with coffee. What happened? She asked. He told her everything. About the attorney, the inheritance, Lillian's father, the impossible choice she was facing. When he was done, Margaret was quiet for a long time. She's going to leave, she said finally. Isn't she? I don't know. But you think she is? Caleb stared into his coffee. I think she's scared. And when people are scared, they either fight or they run. Lillian's always been a runner. Until she came here. Until she came here, he agreed. But that doesn't mean she'll stay. What do you want her to do? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Kit thought about Lillian working in the office. Her face lit up with satisfaction after saving someone's life. Thought about her sitting on the porch talking about her mother. Thought about the way she'd kissed him in the barn and promised no promises. I want her to be happy, he said finally. If that's here, good. If it's in Boston, then that's where she should go. Even if it breaks your heart? Even then. Margaret reached over and squeezed his hand. You're a good man, Caleb Rourke. I hope she knows that. I hope so too. 3 days passed before Lillian came back to the ranch. She looked exhausted and thin. like she hadn't been sleeping or eating properly. "I've made a decision," she said without preamble. Caleb's heart was pounding, but he kept his voice steady. "All right. I'm going back to Boston." The words hit like a physical blow, but he nodded. "When?" "Next week. There's a stage to Tucson, and then a train east." She looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed. "I have to, Caleb. These aren't obligations I can ignore. My father's practice, the estate, people are depending on me to handle this properly." "I understand." "I don't think you do." Her voice cracked. "I don't want to go. I want to stay here and keep being a doctor and keep building this life we started. But I can't ignore this. I can't abandon all those people who worked for my father, who depend on that practice. So handle it and come back." "It's not that simple. Once I'm there—" She stopped, started again. The attorney was right. This is a different world from Arizona. Once I'm back in it, I don't know if I'll be able to leave again. "Then don't go." "I have to." "Why?" Caleb stood up, his frustration finally breaking through. "Why do you have to? You don't owe your father anything. You don't owe Boston anything. The only person you owe is yourself." "And what do I owe myself?" she demanded. "The right to run away from responsibility? The right to pretend the past doesn't exist? The right to choose your own life? I am choosing. I'm choosing to do the responsible thing for once instead of just running away." Tears were streaming down her face now. "Don't you see? If I don't go back, I'll always wonder. I'll always be the coward who ran from her obligations. I can't live with that." Caleb felt something inside him crack. "So you're choosing them over this? Over us?" "There is no us," Lillian said, and the words were like knives. "We said no promises, remember? No obligations, just two people figuring things out? Well, I figured it out. I need to go back." "Fine." Caleb's voice was flat. "Go back. Handle your responsibilities. Be the dutiful daughter even though your father's dead." He walked to the door. "But don't pretend it's about obligation. You're running again. That's what you do." "That's not fair, isn't it?" He looked back at her. "Every time things get hard, you leave. You left Boston. You're leaving here. How long before you run from the next place?" "How dare you?" "I dare because someone needs to tell you the truth." His anger was cold and controlled. "You're not running from your father or your obligations. You're running from the possibility of actually being happy. Because being happy means you might lose it, and you can't handle that risk." Lillian stared at him, her face pale. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? Your mother died and your father tried to control you, so you decided never to need anyone again. Never to stay anywhere long enough to get attached. Well, congratulations. You succeeded. You're free." He opened the door. "I hope it's worth it." He walked out before she could respond, heading to the barn where he could be alone with his anger and his hurt. Behind him, he heard her crying. He kept walking. The next few days were tense and miserable. Lillian stayed in town, preparing for her departure. Caleb threw himself into ranch work, exhausting himself so he wouldn't have to think. Margaret tried to mediate but gave up after both of them snapped at her. She retreated to the house and left them to their mutual misery. 2 days before Lillian was scheduled to leave, Margaret found Caleb in the barn. "You need to talk to her," she said. "Nothing to talk about. She's made her choice." "She's made a choice, not the choice." Margaret sat down on a hay bale. "She's scared, Caleb. Can't you see that? She's terrified that if she stays and lets herself care about you, something will happen and she'll lose everything again. So her solution is to leave before she gets too attached. That's backwards. That's trauma." Margaret's voice was gentle. "I lost my husband 5 years ago, cholera. For 2 years after, I couldn't let myself care about anyone because I was so afraid of losing them too. It wasn't rational, but fear never is. So what am I supposed to do? Tell her how you feel. Give her a reason to stay that's stronger than her fear." "I already did. She chose Boston anyway." "Did you?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Because from what I heard, you told her she was a coward and walked away. That's not the same as telling her you love her." Caleb stopped what he was doing. "I don't—" "Yes, you do. Don't lie to me or to yourself." Margaret stood up. "You love her. She probably loves you too, though she's too scared to admit it. And if you let her leave without saying it, you're both going to regret it for the rest of your lives. What if I say it and she leaves anyway? Then at least you'll know you tried." Margaret walked to the door. "Fear makes us do stupid things." Don't let it make you do this one. After she left, Caleb sat in the barn for a long time, thinking about love and fear and the space between staying and running. The truth was, Margaret was right. He did love Lillian, had probably loved her since she'd stood in the canyon with a shotgun, facing down armed men without flinching. Maybe even before that. But saying it out loud meant risking rejection, meant putting his heart on the line for someone who might leave anyway. He thought about his life before Lillian, quiet, lonely, safe. He thought about what it could be if she stayed, complicated, uncertain, full. The choice was obvious when he put it like that. He found her in the doctor's office packing up supplies. She looked up when he entered, her expression wary. "Caleb?" "Lillian." He closed the door behind him. "We need to talk." "I don't think that's a good idea." "Too bad. I'm talking anyway." He took a breath. "I was wrong. What I said the other day about you being a coward, about running, I was angry and I said things I shouldn't have." "You weren't entirely wrong," she said quietly. "Maybe not, but I was cruel and you didn't deserve that." He moved closer. "The truth is, I'm scared too. Scared of needing you and then losing you. Scared of loving someone who might leave." Her eyes went wide. "Caleb—" "Let me finish." He held up a hand. "I know you need to go to Boston. I understand why. Those are real obligations and you're right to handle them. But I need you to know something before you go." "What?" "I love you." The words came out simpler than he expected. "I love your stubbornness and your competence and the way you refuse to back down from a fight. I love that you saved my life and then stuck around to save others. I love who you are and who you're trying to become." Lillian was crying again, silent tears streaming down her face. "I'm not asking you to stay," Caleb continued. "I'm not asking you to choose me over Boston or your father's legacy or anything else. I'm just asking you to know that you're loved, that if you come back, when you come back, there's a place here for you. With me. If you want it." "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "That's not your call to make. That's mine." He reached out and took her hand. "Go to Boston. Handle your business. Figure out what you want. But know that whatever you decide, I'll be here. That's my choice, and I'm making it freely. What if I don't come back? Then I'll miss you every day for the rest of my life. But at least I'll know I told you the truth." She pulled him into a fierce hug, her face buried in his shoulder. "I don't know how to do this. How to be loved without losing myself. You figure it out as you go, same as everything else." "I'm so scared." "I know, be scared, but also know you're not alone in it." They stood like that for a long time, holding on to each other while the Arizona sun slanted through the windows and painted everything gold. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were clearer. "I need to go," she said, "but I'm coming back. I don't know when, and I don't know what that will look like, but I'm coming back. I'll be here. Promise?" "Promise." She kissed him then, soft and tentative and full of possibility. When she pulled away, she was almost smiling. "Try not to get shot while I'm gone. I'll do my best. And fix that fence. It's been driving me crazy for weeks." "Yes, ma'am." The stage left 2 days later. Caleb and Margaret went to see her off, watching as she climbed aboard with her bags and her medical supplies and her complicated grief. She looked back once before the stage pulled away, her eyes finding his. He raised his hand in farewell. She did the same. Then she was gone, swallowed by dust and distance. "You think she'll come back?" Margaret asked. "I don't know," Caleb said honestly, "but I hope so." The months that followed were hard. Caleb threw himself into ranch work, fixing everything that had been neglected while he'd been recovering. The fence got repaired. The barn roof got new shingles. The garden plot was cleared and planted. Margaret managed the house and occasionally mentioned that the place felt empty without Lillian's presence. Caleb didn't disagree. Letters came every few weeks. Lillian wrote about Boston, about settling her father's estate, about the medical practice she was trying to decide what to do with. She wrote about missing Arizona, about the work she'd left behind, about the life she was trying to figure out. She never said when she was coming back, or if. Caleb wrote back, telling her about the ranch, about the town, about the patients who still asked after her. He kept his letters light, not wanting to pressure her, but every night he went to bed wondering if she'd ever return. 6 months passed, then 7. On the first day of the 8th month, Caleb was repairing the porch railing when he saw a figure approaching on foot, carrying a worn leather bag. His heart stopped. Lillian walked up the path like she'd never left, dust on her traveling dress and determination in her eyes. "The rail's still crooked," she said when she reached him. "I know, keeps falling off the list. That's because you're terrible at prioritizing." "Probably." They stood there for a moment, neither quite believing the other was real. "I sold the practice," Lillian said finally, "and the house, and most of the investments, kept enough to live comfortably, but gave the rest to charity in my mother's name." "That's good. I also established a fund to help women who want to study medicine. Seemed appropriate." She set down her bag. "And then I got on a train heading west because I couldn't stand Boston for another minute." "What about your obligations?" "I met them, handled everything that needed handling, and then I made a choice." She stepped closer. "I chose this. I chose you. If the offer's still open." Caleb's throat was tight. "It's still open." "Good, because I love you too, and I'm done running from it." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she protested. He didn't care. She was here, solid and real in choosing him. "You came back," he said against her hair. "I told you I would." "I was starting to wonder." "Had some things to work through, took longer than I expected." She pulled back to look at him. "But I'm here now, and I'm staying, if you'll have me. On one condition." "What?" "We make this official. Real partnership, legal and binding. I want to marry you properly, not just pretend we're something we're not." Lillian smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her in months. "Is that a proposal?" "It's a statement of intent. The proposal can come later, with better words and maybe a ring." "I don't need better words." She kissed him, fierce and sure. "Yes. To all of it, yes." Margaret appeared in the doorway, took one look at them, and started crying happy tears. "About time," she said. They were married a month later in the small church in town, with Margaret as witness and half the valley in attendance. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. And when Caleb slipped the simple gold band on Lillian's finger, he felt something settle deep in his chest. She was his. He was hers. They'd chosen each other, freely and completely. The reception was held at the ranch, with enough food and whiskey to feed everyone twice over. People danced in the yard while the sun set, painting the Arizona sky in shades of red and gold. Caleb found Lillian standing apart from the celebration, looking out at the land that had become theirs. "Having second thoughts?" he asked. "No. Just thinking about how strange life is." She leaned against him. "A year ago, I was miserable in Boston. Now I'm married to a rancher in Arizona, and I've never been happier. Life's funny that way." "It is." She turned to face him. "I want to expand the practice. Build a real clinic, maybe even a small hospital eventually. The money from my father's estate. I want to use it for something that matters." "Sounds like a good plan." "You don't mind?" "Why would I mind? It's your money and your dream." "Our money," she corrected. "We're partners, remember?" "Right, partners." He kissed her forehead. "In that case, build your hospital. I'll help however I can. Even if it means I'm working all the time. Even then, I didn't marry you to keep you in the kitchen. I married you because you're brilliant and stubborn and you save lives. Don't stop being who you are on my account." She kissed him properly then, in front of everyone, and the crowd cheered. The years that followed were good ones. Hard sometimes. The frontier didn't forgive mistakes and they made their share. But good. Lillian built her clinic and then a small hospital. People came from miles around to be treated by the woman doctor who'd learned her trade in Boston and perfected it on the frontier. She saved lives, delivered babies, and earned the respect of even the most stubborn ranchers. Caleb expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land when it became available. Margaret stayed with them, managing the household and eventually the business side of Lillian's practice. She became family in truth, not just in convenience. They had children, 2 daughters who inherited their mother's intelligence and their father's stubbornness. They grew up running wild on the ranch, learning medicine from Lillian and ranching from Caleb, equally comfortable in both worlds. On quiet evenings when the work was done and the children were asleep, Caleb and Lillian would sit on the porch and watch the stars. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't, but they were always together, 2 people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful anyway. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked one night. "Leaving Boston? Giving up that life?" "Never," Lillian said without hesitation. "That life was killing me slowly. This one brought me back to life." Even with all the hard parts? Especially with the hard parts. She took his hand. I learned something important when I went back to Boston. I learned that freedom isn't about having no obligations. It's about choosing which obligations matter. And which ones matter to you? This ranch, that hospital, our children, you. She squeezed his hand. The obligations I chose freely are the ones worth keeping. Caleb thought about the day he'd been shot and stumbled home to die. Thought about Lillian appearing out of nowhere with her medical bag and her calm competence. Thought about everything that had happened since, the violence, the fear, the choices that had brought them here. I'm glad you found me that day, he said. So am I. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Best mistake I ever made. Thought you said it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't. But you know what I mean. He did. Some things looked like mistakes at first, desperate choices made in the heat of the moment. But time had a way of revealing which choices were wisdom disguised as chaos. They sat there until the stars faded and dawn began to paint the eastern sky. Another day on the frontier, full of work and challenges and the small victories that made life worth living. Inside the house, their daughters were waking. The horses needed feeding. Patients would be arriving at the hospital soon, and there was fence that still needed mending. The work never ended. But that was all right. They had time. They had each other. And they had a life they'd built together from blood and pain and the stubborn refusal to give up on something worth fighting for. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was theirs, freely chosen and hard won. And in the end, that was everything.